Welcome back to the Cheating Tales Lab. First of all, a huge thank you for helping us reach 5,000 subscribers. Thank you all for your amazing support. To celebrate, we're launching our second channel, Infidelity Tales Lab, where you'll get one-day early access to all our stories plus exclusive, original cheating wife stories you won't find anywhere else. You can subscribe now by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment, or simply search for Infidelity Tales Lab on YouTube. Don't miss out. Subscribe and listen to exclusive stories. You won't regret subscribing. Now let's begin the story. Jeffrey Anderson's Mercedes glided smoothly down the suburban streets of Rochester on a quiet Sunday afternoon. The structural engineer gripped the steering wheel with steady hands, proud of completing the Detroit project ahead of schedule. 20 years of dedication had earned him a reputation for excellence in his field. Every bridge, building, and foundation he designed stood as a testament to his unwavering commitment to perfection. At 45, Jeffrey embodied success earned through relentless determination. His tall, athletic frame spoke of pre-dawn workouts that kept him sharp and focused. Steel gray eyes that missed no detail had caught countless potential structural failures before they became catastrophes. The same attention to detail had helped him build what he thought was a perfect life for his family. The two-story colonial home came into view, its manicured lawn and pristine exterior reflecting the orderly life Jeffrey had constructed. His wife Annie's red BMW sat in the driveway alongside Michael's used Civic, a deliberate choice by Jeffrey to teach their eldest responsibility despite their comfortable means. The absence of the usual weekend sounds, Nathan's video game victories, or Emma's violin practice, struck him as unusual. He pulled his briefcase from the trunk, satisfaction coursing through him at the signed contracts inside. The Detroit shopping complex would add another successful project to his firm's portfolio. The prospect of surprising his family with his early return lifted his spirits after the long drive. The side door opened silently. Jeffrey believed in maintaining everything in his domain to the highest standard. No squeaking hinges or loose floorboards would ever compromise the integrity of his home. The house felt still, though he knew at least Annie and Michael were home. Voices drifted down from the second floor as he crossed the foyer. Jeffrey moved toward the stairs when Annie's words froze him mid-step. The paternity test came back. Annie's voice carried a tone of smug triumph that seemed alien coming from the woman he'd known for 18 years. None of the 3 kids are your dad's. Once he pays off your college fees, we'll tell him at your graduation. Then I'll take the house and his assets in divorce. The world crystallized into sharp focus. Jeffrey stood motionless, his mind processing the implications with the same analytical precision he applied to structural stress points. Mom, are you sure about this? Michael's voice wavered with uncertainty. He's always been there for us. Oh, please. Annie's laugh cut through the air like breaking glass. Jeffrey's been nothing but a convenient provider. So focused on his precious career. So proud of taking care of everyone. He never questioned why I spent so much time with Walter. Men like your father are easy to fool when they think they're in control. Jeffrey's mind raced back through the years. Walter Wiley, their family doctor, his supposed friend, the man who delivered all 3 children. Countless dinner parties, golf games, and family celebrations took on a sinister new light. But what about Emma and Nathan? Michael's question echoed Jeffrey's thoughts. They both look up to Dad so much. They'll adjust. Annie dismissed their younger children's feelings with casual cruelty. Walter's their real father anyway. We'll have more than enough money after the divorce settlement. Jeffrey's new contracts will fund quite a comfortable life for us. Walter says everything's set up perfectly, Annie continued, her voice thick with satisfaction. We've been planning this for years. Your father's so predictable. Always at work, always trusting, always playing the devoted family man. He's built us such a nice life to step into once we're rid of him. The conversation continued, each word revealing deeper layers of betrayal. Annie detailed years of deception, coordinated medical appointments that were covers for their meetings, careful manipulation of mutual friends, and systematic exploitation of Jeffrey's long work hours. Jeffrey remained still, absorbing every detail. The structural engineer in him recognized the elaborate framework of lies that had been constructed around him. Every business trip he'd taken to provide for his family had been an opportunity for their betrayal. Every late night at the office pushing to complete projects had given them time to strengthen their deception. Walter's taken care of everything at the medical practice. Annie's voice dripped with admiration for her lover's cunning. All the records support our story. Jeffrey won't be able to challenge anything once we reveal the truth. His reputation for being so straight-laced and proper will work against him. No one will believe he didn't know. The conversation shifted to their plans for after the revelation. Annie spoke of trips they'd take with Jeffrey's money, how they'd redecorate the house once it was hers, how their social circle would adjust to the new reality she and Walter had orchestrated. Jeffrey finally moved, his steps silent as he retreated to his study. The family photos lining the hallway showed scenes from a life he now understood was an elaborate production. Annie's wide smiles at family gatherings, Walter's casual arm around her at barbecues, the children's school events where both men had attended as father and family friend. Each image now revealed its hidden story. He sat at his desk, surrounded by the certificates and awards from his engineering career. His success, built on precision and careful analysis, had made him an attractive target. Annie and Walter had used his dedication against him, counting on his long hours and trusting nature to hide their affair. The irony struck him. The structural engineer who specialized in identifying hidden flaws had missed the fundamental instability in his own home. But unlike his professional projects, where he worked to prevent collapse, this structure of lies deserved to fall. That evening, Jeffrey maintained his normal routine with mechanical precision. He sat through dinner, watching Annie play her role of devoted wife. She asked about his trip, smiled at appropriate moments, and gave no indication that she'd spent the afternoon plotting the destruction of their marriage. The children carried on their usual evening activities. Michael worked on college applications, the weight of his mother's revelation evident in his slightly strained interactions. Emma practiced her violin, the melancholic notes taking on new meaning in light of the afternoon's discoveries. Nathan argued about his bedtime, his teenage defiance masking an innocence about to be shattered. Jeffrey observed them all with new clarity. He could see Walter's features reflected in their faces, details he dismissed over the years as coincidental similarities to Annie's side of the family. The knowledge didn't diminish his love for them, but it highlighted the calculated nature of the deception. Later that night, after the house had fallen silent, Jeffrey sat alone in his study. The structural engineer who'd built his career on ensuring things didn't fall apart now faced the ultimate integrity test. Annie and Walter had spent 18 years constructing their perfect deception. They believed their plan was flawless, their timing impeccable. But they'd made a critical miscalculation. They'd mistaken Jeffrey's dedication for weakness, his trust for blindness, his love for his family as a lever they could use against him. The man who'd earned his success by anticipating and preventing structural failures was now uniquely qualified to orchestrate one. The next morning, Jeffrey rose early as usual. He kissed Annie goodbye, accepted her practiced smile, and drove to his office. To anyone watching, nothing had changed. The respected structural engineer was simply beginning another day of ensuring buildings stood strong and true. But beneath his calm exterior, Jeffrey's mind worked with cold precision. Annie and Walter had built their plans on the assumption that he would play the role of devoted husband right until their moment of triumph. They expected him to continue working, adding to the assets they planned to seize, maintaining the life they intended to steal. They would learn too late that underestimating Jeffrey Anderson was the fatal flaw in their design. The man they dismissed as predictable and blindly trusting was about to show them exactly how dangerous such assumptions could be. The magnitude of their betrayal, 18 years of marriage, 3 children, countless moments of fabricated happiness, might have broken a lesser man. But Jeffrey had built his career on understanding how things fell apart precisely so he could prevent it. This time, he would use that knowledge for a different purpose. Annie and Walter's scheme, years in the making, rested on Jeffrey's ignorance and their control of the narrative. They'd planned every detail, manipulated every relationship, and prepared for every contingency except one. The possibility that their target would discover their plan before they could spring their trap. That evening, Jeffrey watched Annie check her phone repeatedly, no doubt exchanging messages with Walter about their approaching victory. She had no idea that her careful plans were about to face a structural integrity test they couldn't possibly pass. The price of their betrayal would be calculated not in years of deception, but in the totality of their failure. Jeffrey Anderson, the man they judged too trusting and preoccupied with his work, was about to teach them the true cost of underestimating him. The methodical nature that made Jeffrey Anderson an exceptional structural engineer now drove his response to Annie's betrayal. For 2 weeks, he maintained an outward facade of normalcy while meticulously dismantling the elaborate deception his wife and Walter had constructed. His first step was accessing the family's financial records. Sitting in his home office late at night, Jeffrey discovered a pattern of transactions that confirmed the depth of their duplicity. Small amounts transferred from joint accounts over years had accumulated into a substantial hidden fund. "Quite clever, Annie," he muttered, examining the bank statements. "Death by 1,000 cuts." The next morning, Jeffrey received a call from his bank's fraud department. "Mr. Anderson, we've noticed some unusual patterns in your joint accounts," the representative said. "Yes, I imagine you have," Jeffrey replied. "I'd like to schedule a meeting with Bradley Morton today, if possible." Bradley, the branch manager, had handled Jeffrey's accounts for over a decade. His face grew increasingly grave as Jeffrey presented the evidence of Annie's systematic theft. "This is highly irregular, Jeffrey. These transfers have been going on for years. Precisely why I'm here, Bradley. I need complete records of every transaction. Can you help me with that?" "Of course, but..." Bradley hesitated. "Given the pattern, we should discuss protecting your remaining assets." Jeffrey's smile held no warmth. "My thoughts exactly." Later that week, Jeffrey discovered emails between Annie and Walter discussing their plans. The password to Annie's laptop, Nathan's birthday, proved that arrogance had made them careless. The messages revealed years of coordinated deception. From A. Wiley at medcenter.com to AnnieA75 at email.com. Subject, next week. Everything's set for your appointment next Tuesday. Jeffrey's Detroit trip gives us plenty of time. The kids' medical records are secure. No one will ever question the paternity. Your husband's too busy with his precious buildings to notice what's right in front of him. Jeffrey downloaded everything, maintaining his digital forensics with the same precision he applied to structural analysis. Each piece of evidence was cataloged, dated, and backed up securely. A discreet inquiry to his professional network led him to Salvador Emery, a divorce attorney known for handling complex cases with ruthless efficiency. They met in Salvador's downtown office, away from prying eyes. "Tell me everything," Salvador said, his office overlooking the courthouse Jeffrey had helped design. Jeffrey laid out the evidence methodically: financial records, emails, medical documentation. Salvador's eyebrows rose progressively higher. "They've been thorough," the lawyer admitted, "but arrogant. That's good for us. Arrogant people make mistakes." "I want to protect the children first," Jeffrey stated. "They're not mine biologically, but..." Salvador held up a hand. "They're yours in every way that matters. We'll set up trust funds, ironclad ones. Annie won't be able to touch a cent. She and Walter have been spreading rumors," Jeffrey continued, "painting me as emotionally unavailable, hinting at abuse. Classic groundwork for a sympathy play." Salvador nodded. "But it won't work. Your reputation, your records, your consistent presence in your children's lives. It all works in our favor." Over the next few days, Jeffrey noticed changes in Annie's behavior. She took more private calls, scheduled urgent meetings with Walter, watched Jeffrey with poorly concealed suspicion. "Is everything all right?" she asked one evening, her tone probing. "You seem different." Jeffrey looked up from his laptop, where he'd been reviewing trust fund documents. "Just focused on work, dear. The usual." Annie's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You work too hard. Maybe you should take some time off." "After Michael's graduation," Jeffrey replied, watching her suppress a flinch at the mention of their planned moment of triumph. The next day, Walter called Jeffrey's office. "Jeff, it's been too long." Walter's voice oozed false friendship. "Annie mentioned you seemed stressed. Why don't you come in for a checkup?" "I appreciate the concern, Walter," Jeffrey replied coolly, "but I'm perfectly healthy." The call confirmed Jeffrey's suspicions. They were accelerating their timeline. That evening, he overheard Annie on the phone with Walter. "He knows something's wrong," she hissed. "We need to move faster." "Calm down." Walter's voice came through clearly on Jeffrey's recording device. "We've planned this for years. He can't prove anything. But what if? Annie, trust me. I've taken care of everything. The medical records, the paternity tests, our story. It's all perfect. Jeffrey's too straight-laced to fight dirty. Once we file the abuse claim, that's necessary? It's insurance. No judge will give him joint custody after domestic crime allegations. The children will side with you. They always do in these cases. Plus, it explains why you needed so many medical checkups over the years." Jeffrey smiled grimly as he added the recording to his evidence file. Their overconfidence was becoming their undoing. The next week, Annie and Walter made their move. Jeffrey received notice of a domestic crime complaint filed with the police. The accusations were cleverly crafted. No physical abuse, just emotional manipulation and controlling behavior that would be hard to disprove. But Jeffrey was prepared. He presented the police with meticulous records of his whereabouts during every alleged incident, along with evidence of Annie's affair and their conspiracy. Detective Sarah Chun reviewed the documentation with growing amazement. "This is comprehensive, Mr. Anderson. I'm an engineer, detective. Documentation is second nature." "The abuse claims seem retaliatory," she noted, "especially given the timing and these recordings." When Annie discovered the abuse allegations had been dismissed, she made her next desperate move. Jeffrey received an urgent call from Bradley Morton. "She's trying to empty the joint accounts," the banker reported. "All of them? Let me guess. Transfer to an account we've been tracking?" "Exactly. But as discussed, the accounts are frozen," Jeffrey finished. "Thank you, Bradley." That evening, Annie's mask finally cracked. She stormed into Jeffrey's study, face flushed with rage. "What did you do?" she demanded. Jeffrey looked up calmly. "You'll have to be more specific." "The accounts. I can't access our money." "Our money," Jeffrey repeated thoughtfully. Interesting choice of words, given the separate account you've been filling for years. Annie's face went pale. "You." "Me," Jeffrey agreed. The husband too busy with his precious buildings to notice what's right in front of him. "Isn't that how Walter phrased it? You've been spying on me?" "No, Annie. I've been protecting myself." "There's a difference." She recovered quickly, her lips curving into a cruel smile. "It doesn't matter. Once everything comes out about the children." "You mean the paternity that Walter helped you hide? The medical records he falsified? The conspiracy you've both documented so helpfully in emails?" Annie took a step back. "You're bluffing. Engineer, remember? I deal in facts, not bluffs. The children will hate you when they learn the truth." "The truth?" Jeffrey's voice remained steady. "The truth is that I've loved them, supported them, and been there for them their entire lives. The truth is that you and Walter plan to use them as pawns in your scheme. The truth, Annie, is that you've underestimated me for the last time." She fled the study, already dialing Walter's number. Jeffrey returned to his work, adding this conversation to his growing documentation. Annie and Walter had spent years building their perfect plan, but they'd failed to account for one crucial factor. They'd chosen the wrong man to betray. Salvador called the next morning. "They're getting desperate. Walter tried to access some of your medical records at the hospital. Let me guess, records that might support their abuse claims?" "Exactly. But the hospital's internal audit caught it. His unauthorized access has been logged and reported." Jeffrey nodded, adding this development to his files. "They're making mistakes. Big ones," Salvador agreed. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Jeffrey replied, and meant it. Everything's proceeding according to plan. The following days saw Annie and Walter growing increasingly frantic. Their carefully constructed scheme was unraveling thread by thread. Every move they made was anticipated and countered. Every attempt to salvage their plan only provided Jeffrey with more evidence. Their mutual friends, sensing something was wrong, began asking questions. Annie's attempts to maintain her narrative of Jeffrey's emotional abuse fell apart under the weight of years of contradictory evidence. Walter's professional reputation took its first hits as rumors of his ethical breaches began circulating in medical circles. Jeffrey watched it all with the detached interest of an engineer observing a controlled demolition. Each desperate action by Annie and Walter weakened their position further. Their dream of escaping with Jeffrey's assets and reputation intact was crumbling, and they had no one to blame but themselves. As the 2 weeks drew to a close, Jeffrey had everything in place. The trust funds for the children were established and secured. His assets were protected. The evidence was organized and documented. Annie and Walter's attempts to seize control had been thwarted at every turn. They had spent 18 years constructing their deception. Jeffrey had needed only 14 days to dismantle it completely. Now all that remained was to wait for the perfect moment to bring their entire scheme crashing down around them. The morning of Michael's high school graduation dawned bright and clear. Jeffrey Anderson stood in his kitchen at 5 a.m., methodically arranging documents on the marble countertop. The DNA test results lay beside the divorce papers, each page a nail in the coffin of Annie's carefully constructed deception. Salvador Emery had already filed the divorce papers the previous day, ensuring everything was legally in motion before the reveal. The grounds were clear: adultery and fraud spanning nearly 2 decades. The documentation was exhaustive, leaving no room for contest or denial. Everything's in place, Salvador had confirmed during their final meeting. The trust funds are ironclad. Each child's education and future are secured, completely separate from the divorce proceedings. Jeffrey placed 3 sealed envelopes beside the documents, each bearing the name of one of his children. The letters inside contained everything they needed to understand: bank statements showing Annie's systematic theft, email exchanges between her and Walter plotting their deception, medical records revealing Walter's manipulation of paternity information, and most importantly, Jeffrey's own words to each child. To Michael, he wrote about pride, not in academic achievements or athletic victories, but in the young man's growing sense of integrity. He included proof of the college trust fund, ensuring his eldest wouldn't have to compromise his future. Emma's letter acknowledged her passion for music and art, traits Annie had always dismissed as impractical. Jeffrey had established a separate fund for her artistic pursuits, ensuring she could follow her dreams without financial constraint. For Nathan, the youngest, Jeffrey included tickets to the gaming convention they'd planned to attend, paid for and transferable. His letter emphasized that family wasn't about DNA but about choice and love. The sound of movement upstairs signaled the beginning of the day's choreographed destruction. Jeffrey had already removed his essential belongings from the house, leaving behind the trappings of the life Annie had planned to steal. Annie entered the kitchen first, already dressed for the graduation ceremony in an expensive dress bought with Jeffrey's money. She froze at the sight of the documents on the counter. "What's this?" Her voice wavered despite her attempt at authority. "The truth," Jeffrey replied simply, pushing the DNA results forward. "Though I suspect you're already familiar with it." Annie's face drained of color as she scanned the papers. "These are fake." "You can't." "Fake? Like the past 18 years of our marriage? Like Walter's medical records? Like your love? You don't understand." Annie's voice took on the manipulative tone she perfected over years. "I did it for the children." "No," Jeffrey cut her off. "You did it for yourself. And now you can live with the consequences." Heavy footsteps on the stairs announced Michael's arrival. He entered the kitchen in his graduation robes, stopping short at the tension-filled scene. "Dad? Mom? What's going on?" "Your mother was just about to explain," Jeffrey said calmly. "About the paternity tests. About her plans for after your graduation. About Walter." Michael's face showed recognition. He'd carried the weight of his mother's revelation for weeks. Annie turned to him desperately. "Michael, honey, you don't understand. Your father is trying to—" "To what, Mom?" Michael's voice was hard. "To expose what you told me? About how none of us are his kids. About taking his money after graduation?" Emma and Nathan appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. Their expressions shifted from confusion to shock as they saw the documents spread across the counter. "There are letters for each of you," Jeffrey said, gesturing to the envelopes. "Everything is explained inside, along with proof. The choice of what to do with that information is yours." Annie lunged for the papers, but Jeffrey had anticipated this. Copies were already safely stored with Salvador, and digital versions were secured in multiple locations. You can't do this. Annie's composure cracked. Walter, and you have lost, Jeffrey stated flatly. The divorce papers are filed. Your secret accounts are frozen. The trust funds for the children are beyond your reach. Annie's phone buzzed. Walter, right on schedule. Jeffrey allowed himself a small smile as she answered. Walter? They know. He knows everything. She listened, her face contorting. What do you mean your privileges are suspended? How can they? The medical board? Jeffrey watched his children read their letters, their worlds shifting on their axes. Emma's hands trembled as she read about her mother's deception. Nathan's jaw clenched at the revelations about Walter. I've transferred ownership of my company's shares to a protected trust, Jeffrey announced, his voice carrying the same precision he used in engineering presentations. The house mortgage has been reassigned. Your credit cards will be deactivated by noon. You can't just leave us with nothing. Annie shrieked. Nothing? Jeffrey's voice was ice. Like what you planned for me. At least I've ensured the children are provided for. That's more than you and Walter intended to do with my assets. The doorbell rang. Salvador Emery, right on time. Annie's face showed the first traces of fear as the lawyer entered, carrying additional documentation. Mrs. Anderson, Salvador said formally, I have some papers requiring your immediate attention. What followed was a systematic dismantling of Annie's carefully constructed future. Salvador detailed the legal consequences of her actions, the fraud, the financial theft, the conspiracy with Walter. Each point was supported by irrefutable evidence. Jeffrey watched Annie's desperate attempts to salvage control, to twist the narrative, to paint herself as the victim. But the documentation was too thorough, the evidence too damning. The children need me, she tried. A last desperate plea. No, Mom, Michael spoke, his voice firm. We needed the truth. Dad gave us that, along with a choice. Emma and Nathan stood with their brother, their unity a silent testimony to Jeffrey's years of genuine parenting versus Annie's manipulation. I'll be leaving now, Jeffrey announced. The letters explain everything else you need to know. The trust funds are active, your educations and futures are secure. He turned to Annie. Goodbye, Annie. Walter's probably waiting for your call. Though I suspect his support might be somewhat diminished now that your plans have fallen apart. As Jeffrey walked out of the house for the last time, he heard Annie's phone ring again. Her conversation with Walter confirmed everything. Their perfect plan was in ruins, their reputations shattered, their futures uncertain. The aftermath unfolded exactly as Jeffrey had orchestrated. Annie and Walter's attempts to contest the divorce failed against the mountain of evidence. Their mutual friends, presented with proof of their decades-long deception, turned away in disgust. Walter's medical license came under intense scrutiny when his falsification of medical records came to light. His privileged position, used to help hide his affair and manipulate paternity records, became the instrument of his downfall. Jeffrey didn't stay to watch the collapse. He had planned a complete departure. New city, new opportunities, new life. His revenge wasn't in destroying Annie and Walter's plans. It was in rising above their betrayal while ensuring they faced the consequences of their choices. The graduation ceremony proceeded as scheduled, though with a very different outcome than Annie had planned. Instead of being her moment of triumph, it became the public beginning of her downfall. Later that day, Salvador called to confirm the final details. Everything's proceeding as planned. Annie's attempts to access the accounts have been blocked. Walter's lawyer is already trying to negotiate. No negotiations, Jeffrey replied firmly. They chose their path. Now they can walk it. The trust funds he'd established would ensure his children's futures remain secure. The letters he'd left would ensure they understood the truth. His departure would ensure Annie and Walter faced the full impact of their actions without him there to blame or manipulate. News spread quickly through their social circle. Annie's careful narrative of Jeffrey's emotional distance crumbled in the face of evidence showing her long-term deception. Walter's professional reputation, built over decades, collapsed under the weight of his ethical violations. Jeffrey's final act was to send an email to their mutual friends, attaching key pieces of evidence that exposed the full scope of Annie and Walter's betrayal. He didn't need to embellish or explain. The facts spoke for themselves. As his plane took off that evening, Jeffrey reflected on the precision of his response to their betrayal. Annie and Walter had spent 18 years constructing their deception, planning to take everything he'd built. Instead, they would spend years facing the consequences of their choices, while the children they'd used as pawns would have the freedom to choose their own paths. The structural engineer who'd built his career on ensuring things stood strong had orchestrated the perfect controlled demolition of his marriage, ensuring that only the guilty parties would be caught in the collapse. 4 years passed like blueprints through Jeffrey Anderson's hands, precise, measured, each detail in its place. Seattle had proven the perfect location to rebuild his life. The city's perpetual rain and soaring skyscrapers matched his methodical nature, and his reputation as a structural engineer had only grown stronger. His corner office at Wilson and Anderson Engineering overlooked the city he'd helped reshape. 3 major projects bore his signature: a revolutionary earthquake-resistant hospital, a sustainable corporate headquarters, and a bridge that local newspapers called a work of art. The morning Michael found him, Jeffrey was reviewing plans for his newest project. His secretary's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Anderson, there's a young man here to see you. He says his name is Michael." Jeffrey's hand stilled over the blueprints. He'd known this day might come. He'd left enough breadcrumbs in his carefully crafted exit for his children to follow if they chose to. "Send him in, Claire." Michael entered, taller than Jeffrey remembered, carrying himself with the confidence of a college senior. His features, so like Walter's, had matured, but his eyes held the same integrity Jeffrey had always seen in them. "You weren't easy to find," Michael said, standing just inside the door. "That wasn't the point," Jeffrey replied, gesturing to a chair. "The point was that you could find me if you wanted to." Michael sat, studying the man who'd raised him. Mom lost everything. The house, her friends, her reputation. All of it. And Walter? A bitter smile crossed Michael's face. Left her the moment the divorce settlement came through. Turns out his love was as fake as hers. Jeffrey nodded, unsurprised. "And your siblings?" "Emma's thriving at art school. The trust fund you set up made that possible. Nathan's finishing high school, top of his class in computer science. We all read the letters. We understood why you left." The silence between them held years of unspoken words. Jeffrey waited, letting Michael find his voice. "Mom lives in a 1-bedroom apartment now, works at Marshall's folding clothes. She tries to contact us constantly, begging for forgiveness, saying she's changed." Michael's voice hardened. "None of us want anything to do with her." "That's your choice to make," Jeffrey said. "I made sure you'd have that freedom." Walter's medical license was suspended, Michael continued. The review board found more cases of falsified records. His wife left him, took half of everything. Last I heard, he moved to Arizona to start over. Jeffrey's expression remained neutral. The fate of his betrayers meant nothing to him now. "Your mom told us you were emotionally distant," Michael said, leaning forward, "that you cared more about your buildings than us. But you're the one who made sure we were taken care of, who gave us the truth, who let us choose our own paths." "DNA doesn't make a father," Jeffrey replied simply. Michael pulled out his phone, showing pictures of Emma's art exhibitions and Nathan's robotics competitions. "We've been keeping track of your projects too. That hospital design in Portland? Nathan says it's brilliant." The conversation flowed easier after that. Michael shared stories of college life, his plans for graduate school, the ways he and his siblings had supported each other through the aftermath of their parents' deception. "Emma and Nathan want to see you," Michael said finally. "When you're ready. They understand if you don't." "I'd like that," Jeffrey cut in. The children he'd raised choosing to return to him meant more than any victory over Annie and Walter. Over the next few months, Emma and Nathan visited separately. Each meeting healed another piece of what Annie and Walter had tried to destroy. Emma, her artistic soul wrapped in quiet strength, brought photos of her installations. "The trust fund changed everything," she told him. "Mom always said art was a waste of time, that I needed to be practical like her. But you believed in me even after." "I believed in you because of who you are," Jeffrey replied. "That hasn't changed." Nathan, nearly as tall as Jeffrey now, talked technology and engineering with the enthusiasm Jeffrey remembered. Your letter helped me understand what integrity really means, he said during one visit. Watching Mom and Walter fall apart, seeing how their lies caught up with them, it taught me what not to be. Their mother's attempts to re-enter their lives became a constant background noise they all ignored. Annie's calls, texts, and emails painted a picture of a desperate woman facing the consequences of her choices. She showed up at my dorm, Emma reported during one visit. Said she was a changed person, that she'd learned her lesson. But all I could think about was how she and Walter plotted to take everything from you. Nathan's encounter with his mother at a grocery store revealed how far she'd fallen. She was wearing a marshal's uniform, looked so different from the woman who used to host dinner parties and plan our lives. She tried to hug me, started crying when I walked away. Jeffrey's success grew with each passing year. His firm's reputation for innovation and integrity attracted major clients across the country. The irony wasn't lost on him. While Annie folded clothes and Walter rebuilt his practice in Arizona, Jeffrey's wealth and influence had multiplied. Your mother keeps trying to friend me on social media, Claire, his secretary, mentioned one day. Should I block her? She's not worth the effort, Jeffrey replied. Let her see what she lost. The children's visits became more frequent. Family dinners at Jeffrey's penthouse apartment replaced the forced gatherings of their past. They built new traditions, stronger for being chosen rather than obligated. Michael brought his fiancée to meet Jeffrey first, before any other family. You're the one whose opinion matters, he explained. Emma sought Jeffrey's advice about gallery showings and commissions. Nathan called to discuss engineering concepts and career choices. The family they rebuilt wasn't bound by DNA, but by something far more powerful: truth, respect, and conscious choice. Annie's betrayal had cost her everything she'd schemed to obtain, while Jeffrey's integrity had given him something far more valuable than what he'd lost. Do you ever regret how thoroughly you destroyed their plans? Michael asked during one evening, watching the Seattle sunset from Jeffrey's balcony. Jeffrey considered the question. Regret would imply they deserved mercy. Your mother and Walter spent 18 years plotting to take everything I built, using my love for you three as a weapon. They earned every consequence. The children understood. They'd seen firsthand how betrayal masquerading as love could destroy foundations thought unshakable. More importantly, they'd witnessed how integrity and strength could build something even stronger from the ruins. Annie's desperate attempts at contact continued through the years, each ignored with the same finality as Jeffrey's execution of his revenge. Her messages spoke of loneliness, of regret, of a changed heart, words as empty as her promises had been. Mom's getting desperate, Emma reported after another failed attempt at reconciliation. She actually suggested family counseling, said we could all heal together. Jeffrey's response was characteristically direct. Healing implies she has something worth saving. She made her choice 18 years ago. Now she can live with it. The contrast between their lives grew starker with each passing year. While Jeffrey's firm expanded to new cities and his children flourished in their chosen paths, Annie's world remained confined to her small apartment and retail job. Walter, rebuilding a modest practice in Arizona, had remarried but lost that family too when his past caught up with him. Your revenge wasn't anything you did to them, Nathan observed during one of their regular dinners. It was succeeding without them, being happy despite them, and letting them watch from the sidelines. Jeffrey smiled at his youngest's insight. The best revenge is building something they can never touch. As the years passed, Jeffrey's definition of success evolved. It wasn't measured in the buildings he designed or the wealth he accumulated, but in the family that chose to return to him. Michael's wedding, Emma's gallery openings, Nathan's graduation. Each milestone celebrated without Annie marked another victory of substance over deception. The family photographs in Jeffrey's office told the new story: 3 children who chose truth over convenience, integrity over betrayal, and a father who earned their love through actions rather than biology. Annie's betrayal had cost her everything she valued, while Jeffrey's principles had given him something far more precious: a family bound by choice rather than obligation. His revenge wasn't in the calculated destruction of Annie and Walter's plans, but in the peace and success he found without them, and in the love his children chose to give him even after learning the truth. The price of betrayal had been everything Annie held dear, while the reward for integrity was a family stronger than blood. Epilogue. 10 years after Jeffrey Anderson's masterful dismantling of Annie and Walter's scheme, the consequences of their betrayal continued to shape their lives in ways they never anticipated. Annie Morgan, she'd reverted to her maiden name after even Walter abandoned her, still worked the evening shift at Marshall's. Her small one-bedroom apartment in the less desirable part of Rochester stood in stark contrast to the life she'd once planned to steal. The designer clothes and luxury cars had been replaced by clearance rack outfits and bus passes. Her attempts to rebuild her social standing had failed spectacularly. Former friends who'd once attended her lavish dinner parties now crossed the street to avoid her. The county club membership had been revoked after the truth about her affair with Walter emerged. Her weekly routine consisted of folding clothes, stocking shelves, and watching through social media as her children celebrated life's milestones without her. "Did you see the photos from Michael's daughter's christening?" she asked her only remaining friend, a fellow retail worker, during their lunch break. "Jeffrey was there. He's a grandfather now, and I wasn't even told about the pregnancy." Walter Wiley's fall proved equally spectacular. After the medical board suspended his license in Rochester, his attempt to rebuild in Arizona crumbled when his past caught up with him. His second wife left after discovering his history of deception, taking half of his already diminished assets. Now in his early 60s, Walter ran a small medical consultation business in Phoenix, his practice limited to reviewing files rather than treating patients. His reputation, once sterling, carried an asterisk that no amount of time seemed to erase. The medical board's investigation had revealed other ethical breaches beyond falsifying the Anderson children's records, suggesting a pattern of professional misconduct that spanned his entire career. Dr. Wiley's recommendations will be taken under advisement became the standard response from hospitals and insurance companies, code for his opinion carrying little weight. Meanwhile, Jeffrey's empire had grown beyond even his careful planning. Wilson and Anderson Engineering now had offices in 6 major cities, with Jeffrey's innovative designs reshaping skylines across the country. His memoir, Building on Integrity, A Structural Engineer's Journey, became required reading in engineering programs, though it never mentioned Annie or Walter by name. The children's lives reflected the strength of choosing truth over convenience. Michael, now a successful corporate lawyer, had married Sarah, a pediatric surgeon. Their daughter, Claire, became the center of Jeffrey's world. He designed and built them a home that architectural magazines featured as a perfect blend of form and function. Emma's artistic career flourished. Her installations, exploring themes of truth, deception, and chosen family, showed in galleries worldwide. She'd found love with Rebecca, a gallery curator who understood the power of art to heal old wounds. Jeffrey walked her down the aisle at their wedding, while Annie learned about it through a local newspaper article. Nathan followed in Jeffrey's footsteps, but in his own way. His software company specialized in structural analysis programs, combining his father's engineering precision with his passion for technology. He married his college sweetheart, Maria, and their twin boys spent weekends in Jeffrey's workshop, learning about building things that last. The annual Anderson family gatherings at Jeffrey's Seattle penthouse became legendary in their social circle. Children, spouses, and now grandchildren celebrated holidays and milestones, their bonds stronger for being chosen rather than merely inherited. Annie's Christmas cards to her children, sent faithfully each year, remained unopened before being discarded. Her attempts to contact her grandchildren through social media were blocked. The trust funds Jeffrey established had ensured that neither she nor Walter could ever use money as leverage to regain access to the family. "Your mother was at the mall again," Sarah told Michael one evening. She tried to approach Claire. "Did she tell you what happened to her real grandmother?" Michael had asked, referring to Jeffrey's mother, who'd become the loving grandmother Annie could never be. Walter's third marriage dissolved after his new wife discovered his pattern of infidelity. His adult children from his first marriage, learning of his betrayal of the Andersons, cut contact. His medical consultation business barely covered his alimony payments, and his attempts to publish in medical journals were met with polite rejections. Karma, as Emma observed during one family dinner, doesn't need help when truth does its work. The mutual friends who'd initially believed Annie's lies about Jeffrey's emotional distance now sought his advice on business and personal matters. His reputation for integrity and strategic thinking had only grown stronger with time. Several had invested in his firm, their faith rewarded by his consistent success. Jeffrey's relationship with his children deepened with each passing year. He became the confidant they turned to for major life decisions, the grandfather who never missed a recital or game, the father who showed them that character trumped biology. The family photographs in his office told the story of triumph over betrayal. Michael's law school graduation, Emma's first solo show, Nathan's company launch. Each image captured a moment of success built on the foundation of truth Jeffrey had laid. Annie watched this happiness from the periphery of social media and local news coverage. Her small apartment's walls held photos of the children from before the revelation, frozen in time like her dreams of the life she tried to steal. Walter, reduced to consulting from a home office in Phoenix, sometimes Googled his former medical practice, now a thriving clinic under new ownership. His medical license remained permanently restricted, his name a cautionary tale in ethics seminars. Neighborhood children still pointed out Annie at the Marshall store, whispering about the woman who lost everything because of her lies. She'd aged beyond her years, the stress of her downfall etched into her face. The designer anti-aging creams had been replaced by drugstore brands, her salon visits by home dye kits. Jeffrey, in contrast, had grown distinguished with age. His success attracted attention from younger women, but he remained focused on his family and work. His reputation as one of the nation's premier structural engineers was matched only by his standing as a devoted father and grandfather. "How do you feel about Mom now?" Nathan asked during one family gathering, watching his twins play with their cousins. "I don't," Jeffrey replied simply. "She's not worth the energy of feeling anything." The price of betrayal had been complete. Annie and Walter had lost not just their material comforts and social standing, but the very things they tried to steal: family, respect, and peace. Their punishment wasn't in any single action Jeffrey had taken, but in the daily reminder of all they'd thrown away. The legacy of their betrayal served as a reminder that true family transcended biology, that integrity outlasted deception, and that the most devastating revenge was living well in plain sight of those who tried to destroy you. Jeffrey Anderson's greatest victory wasn't in the buildings he designed or the wealth he accumulated, but in the family that chose him, the respect he maintained, and the peace he found in knowing that justice sometimes worked exactly as designed. For Annie Morgan and Walter Wiley, the real punishment wasn't in losing their material possessions or social status, but in watching from the sidelines as the family they tried to destroy thrived without them, bound together by something stronger than the lies they'd thought would never be discovered. The price of betrayal, it turned out, was paid not just in lost assets and opportunities, but in the daily recognition that some choices carried consequences that no amount of time could erase.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Hello and welcome. Thanks for tuning in to Cheating Tales Lab. We got another awesome story for you, and we hope you enjoy every moment. So let's jump into the story and get things rolling. Jake's boots hit the driveway with a soft thud as he climbed out of his truck. The weight of a grueling 24-hour shift hung on his shoulders, his turnout gear reeking of smoke and sweat. He fumbled with his keys, the metal cool against his calloused hands. The house was quiet when he entered. No TV noise, no clattering of pots and pans from the kitchen. Just silence. Jake's instincts, honed by years of assessing dangerous situations, prickled at the back of his neck. He found Melissa sprawled on the couch, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other loosely gripping her phone. Her chest rose and fell in the steady rhythm of sleep. Jake's eyes lingered on her face, taking in the soft curves he'd memorized over their years together. A pang of tenderness tugged his heart, quickly followed by a wave of exhaustion. As he turned to head upstairs, a faint buzz caught his attention. Melissa's phone screen lit up with a new message. Jake hesitated, his Boy Scout ethics warring with a nagging sense of unease that had been growing for weeks. The message preview was just visible. "Mom, I can't keep this up anymore. Jake's not the father. I never meant for it to go this far, but I couldn't lose him." What do I do now? Jake's world tilted on its axis. The room spun, and he gripped the back of the couch to steady himself. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the words glowing on the screen. Each syllable was a dagger, piercing through the life he thought he knew. Melissa stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked, focusing on Jake's face. A slow smile spread across her lips, but it faltered as she registered his expression. Jake? What's wrong? Her voice was thick with sleep. He held up the phone, his hand trembling slightly. Care to explain this? Melissa's eyes widened, darting between Jake's face and the damning message. Her mouth opened and closed, no words coming out. It's not. I can explain, she finally managed, pushing herself up to a sitting position. Jake's voice was low, controlled. Explain what? How you've been lying to me. How this child isn't mine. Melissa's face crumpled. I'm sorry, Jake. I never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake, a stupid, horrible mistake. Who? Jake demanded, his composure slipping. Melissa looked away, her shoulders hunched. Alex, she whispered. The name hit Jake like a physical blow. Alex, his childhood friend, the best man at their wedding, the godfather to their adopted daughter. How long? Jake's voice was barely audible. 6 months, Melissa admitted, tears streaming down her face. It just happened, and then I found out I was pregnant, and I was scared, and I thought if I just pretended. Jake cut her off with a raised hand. He couldn't bear to hear more. His mind was reeling, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. Our marriage is over, he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I want you out of this house by tomorrow. Melissa reached for him, her face a mask of desperation. Please, Jake, we can work this out. I love you. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. Jake stepped back, out of her reach. There's nothing to fix, Melissa. You've destroyed everything we had, everything we were supposed to have. His hand unconsciously moved to his chest, where the weight of betrayal sat like a stone. As he turned to leave the room, Melissa called out, her voice breaking. What about the baby? Jake paused at the doorway, his back to her. That's not my problem anymore, is it? Without another word, he walked out, leaving Melissa sobbing on the couch. The next morning, Jake sat across from Sarah Blackwood, a sharp-eyed divorce attorney with a reputation for ruthlessness. The office was all polished wood and leather, a stark contrast to Jake's rumpled appearance. So, Mr. Buford, Sarah began, her pen poised over a legal pad. You want to initiate divorce proceedings before the birth of a child? Jake nodded, his jaw clenched. Yes, and I want to contest paternity. Sarah's eyebrows rose slightly. I see. And you have evidence of your wife's infidelity? Jake pulled out his phone, sliding it across the desk. Text messages, credit card statements showing hotel bookings, everything's there. As Sarah scrolled through the information, Jake's phone buzzed with a news alert. He glanced at it, his firefighter instincts kicking in. A massive wildfire had broken out in the nearby national forest. I'm sorry, Jake said, standing abruptly. I have to go. Duty calls. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. We'll continue this later. I'll start the paperwork based on what you've provided. Jake rushed to the fire station, his personal turmoil pushed aside by the urgency of the situation. As he donned his gear, he overheard snippets of conversation from his fellow firefighters. Poor Jake, one voice murmured. Can't believe Melissa would do that to him. With Alex of all people, another chimed in. Talk about a betrayal. Jake froze, his hand stilling on his helmet strap. The affair had been an open secret. His friend, his colleagues, they had all known. The realization was like a second betrayal, compounding the pain of Melissa's infidelity. Swallowing hard, Jake pushed the thoughts aside. There was a fire to fight, lives to save. He couldn't afford to be distracted. As the team headed out, sirens blaring, Jake's mind shifted into professional mode. The personal could wait. Right now, he had a job to do. Months passed in a blur of legal meetings, work shifts, and sleepless nights. Jake threw himself into his job, taking on extra shifts and volunteering for the most dangerous assignments. His colleagues worried, but none dared to confront him directly. The day of the baby's birth arrived with a sense of inevitability. Jake stood outside the maternity ward, his heart a storm of conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to rush in to see the child he had spent months preparing for. Another part wanted to turn and run, to pretend none of this was happening. A nurse approached, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Buford, we're ready to perform the paternity test." Jake nodded, his throat tight. He followed her into a small room, where a technician waited with swabs and vials. The procedure was quick, clinical. Jake barely felt the swab against his cheek, his mind far away. Days later, Jake sat in his lawyer's office, staring at the results. The words swam before his eyes, but their meaning was clear. He was not the father. Sarah's voice cut through the fog in his mind. "Jake, we need to discuss our next steps. With these results, we have a strong case for paternity fraud." Jake looked up. "Do it. File the lawsuit. I want Melissa to face consequences for what she's done." As Sarah made notes, Jake's phone rang. It was his financial advisor, sounding panicked. "Jake, I don't know how to tell you this, but there's been some unusual activity in your investment accounts. It looks like someone's been using insider information to undercut your property investments." Jake's mind raced, connecting the dots. Alex was a real estate developer. Melissa had access to all of Jake's financial information. The betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined. "Thank you for letting me know," Jake said, his voice cold. "I'll take care of it." As he hung up, Jake turned to Sarah. "We need to add something to the lawsuit. It seems Melissa and her lover have been busy with more than just their affair." Sarah's eyes gleamed with the prospect of a more complex case. "Tell me everything," she said, pen at the ready. Jake began to speak, laying out the web of deceit that had ensnared him. As he talked, a plan began to form in his mind. Melissa and Alex had tried to destroy his life. Now it was time for Jake to fight back. The acrid smell of smoke clung to Jake's turnout gear as he trudged into the fire station. His eyes were bloodshot, his face etched with exhaustion. The wildfire that had been raging for weeks showed no signs of abating, and Jake had been working double shifts, pushing himself to the brink. As he made his way to his locker, he overheard snippets of conversation from the chief's office. "Need a new captain. Someone who can handle the pressure. What about Buford? He's been putting in more hours than anyone." Jake paused, his hand on his locker door. He hadn't been gunning for a promotion, but the idea settled in his mind like a spark in dry tinder. 2 days later, Jake stood before the chief, accepting the captain's badge with a mixture of pride and determination. As he pinned it to his uniform, he couldn't help but think of Melissa and how she would have reacted to this news in a different life. The thought was like a splash of cold water, reminding him of the betrayal that had brought him to this point. Jake threw himself into his new role with a fervor that bordered on obsession. He pored over city plans, studied fire patterns, and drilled his team relentlessly. If anyone noticed the dark circles under his eyes or the way his hands sometimes shook from too much coffee and too little sleep, they didn't mention it. One afternoon, as Jake was reviewing permit applications for new construction projects, a familiar name caught his eye. Alex Development Corporation. The company was seeking approval for a major project on the outskirts of town, right in the path of the still raging wildfire. Jake's jaw clenched. He could almost hear Alex's smug voice, pitching the project to investors, using information he'd gleaned from Melissa to undercut Jake's own investments. Without hesitation, Jake reached for his red stamp. "Application denied," he muttered, bringing the stamp down with more force than necessary. "Insufficient fire safety measures." It wasn't a lie. The plans were shoddy, clearly rushed. But Jake knew he was letting his personal feelings influence his decision. He paused, pen hovering over the denial form. Was he any better than them if he abused his position like this? After a moment's hesitation, Jake set the pen down. He wouldn't stoop to their level. Instead, he pulled out a fresh form and began detailing exactly what changes would be needed for the project to meet fire code. It would delay Alex's plan significantly, but it would be above board. As Jake worked, his mind drifted to the insider trading he'd uncovered. He'd been sitting on that information for weeks, unsure of how to proceed. Now, with his new position and the respect it commanded, he saw a way forward. That evening, after his shift ended, Jake sat in his truck in the station parking lot. His finger hovered over the send button on his phone. The email was addressed to the SEC, detailing Alex's suspicious trading activities and providing documentation. It was all anonymous, of course. Jake had been careful about that. He took a deep breath and pressed send. As the email whooshed away, Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He was fighting back, but he was doing it the right way. The next morning, as Jake drove to the station, he noticed the plume of smoke on the horizon had grown larger. The wildfire was creeping closer to town, an ever-present threat looming over everything. Jake's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He had a job to do, both as a firefighter and as a man seeking justice. And he'd be damned if he let either the fire or his personal demons win. Jake's phone buzzed insistently on his nightstand, pulling him from a fitful sleep. He glanced at the clock, 3:17 a.m. His heart rate spiked, anticipating bad news about the fire. But the name on the screen made his blood run cold for a different reason. Melissa. He let it ring, watching as the call went to voicemail. A moment later, a text appeared. Jake, please. We need to talk. It's important. Jake stared at the message, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to continue cutting Melissa out of his life. But another part, a part he hated, still cared. Before he could decide, another text came through. I'm outside. Please, just 5 minutes. Jake cursed under his breath. He threw on a t-shirt and jeans and made his way downstairs, steeling himself for whatever was to come. Melissa stood on his porch, looking small and vulnerable in the dim light. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hair disheveled. For a moment, Jake felt a pang of concern, quickly followed by a wave of anger at his own weakness. What do you want, Melissa? His voice was gruff, sleep-addled, and annoyed. She flinched at his tone, but pressed on. Jake, I know I've hurt you. More than I can ever make, right? But please, I'm begging you, can we talk? I've ended things with Alex. For good this time. Jake's laugh was harsh, devoid of humor. And that's supposed to make everything okay? You lied to me, Melissa. You tried to pass off another man's child as mine. You betrayed everything we built together. Melissa's eyes welled with tears. I know, and I'm sorry. I was scared and stupid and selfish. But Jake, we have a history. We have Emma. Can't we try to work this out? For her sake, if nothing else. At the mention of their adopted daughter, Jake felt his resolve harden. Don't you dare use Emma as a bargaining chip. You lost that, right, when you decided to cheat. That's not what I meant, Melissa protested, reaching out as if to touch Jake's arm. He stepped back, out of reach. I could never trust you again, Melissa. Don't you understand that? Every word out of your mouth, every action, I'd always be wondering if it was another lie, another betrayal. Melissa's face crumpled. What can I do? Tell me what I can do to make this right. Jake shook his head. There's nothing you can do. It's over, Melissa. I've been documenting everything. Your affair, your erratic behavior, everything. I'm going for full custody of Emma. The color drained from Melissa's face. You can't do that. She's my daughter, too. I can and I will, Jake said, his voice low and determined. Emma deserves stability, not a mother who lies and cheats without remorse. Melissa's demeanor changed in an instant, her pleading expression morphing into one of anger and desperation. If you do this, I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone what a cold, unfeeling bastard you are. How you pushed me into Alex's arms with your long hours and emotional distance. Jake felt a chill run down his spine at the venom in her voice. This was a side of Melissa he'd never seen before, and it only reinforced his decision. Go ahead, he said, his voice steady. Tell them whatever you want. The truth will come out in the end. He turned to go back inside, but Melissa's voice stopped him. This isn't over, Jake. You'll regret this. As he closed the door, Jake leaned against it, his heart pounding. He knew Melissa was right about one thing. This wasn't over. But he was prepared for whatever came next. The courthouse loomed before Jake, its imposing facade a stark reminder of the battle he was about to face. The custody hearing for Emma was scheduled for today, and Jake felt the weight of it pressing down on him like a physical force. As he climbed the steps, he spotted a familiar figure waiting near the entrance. Sarah Blackwood, his attorney, cut an impressive figure in her tailored suit. Her expression was grim as Jake approached. We've got a problem, she said without preamble. Melissa's team is throwing everything they've got at us. They're painting you as an absent father, too dedicated to your job to be a proper parent. Jake's jaw clenched. That's rich, coming from a woman who cheated on her husband and tried to pass off another man's child as his. Sarah held up a hand. I know, and we'll counter that. But there's something else. We've uncovered some interesting information about Melissa's finances. Jake's eyebrows rose. What kind of information? Sarah glanced around, then lowered her voice. It seems Melissa has been embezzling funds from the charities she works for. We're talking substantial amounts over the past year. Jake felt a mix of shock and a sort of satisfaction. Can we use this? Sarah nodded. We can, but we need to be careful. If we present it in court, it becomes public record. That could jeopardize the charity's reputation and potentially harm the people they help. Jake ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He thought of the people the charity helped, the good work they did. Could he really expose that, even if it meant winning custody of Emma? What if we reported it anonymously? Jake suggested. To the charity's board, not the court. It's the right thing to do, and it might force Melissa to step down without dragging the charity through the mud. Sarah considered this for a moment, then nodded. That could work. It would certainly strengthen our case if Melissa suddenly lost her job due to financial impropriety. As they walked into the courthouse, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was fighting for Emma. Yes, but he was also fighting for what was right. The hearing was grueling. Melissa's lawyers painted Jake as a workaholic, too busy fighting fires to be a proper father. They brought up the long hours, the missed school events, the times Jake had to cancel plans because of work emergencies. But Jake's team was prepared. They presented evidence of Jake's involvement in Emma's life, homework help over video calls during his night shifts, rearranged schedules to attend her dance recitals, the special daddy-daughter days he planned on his days off. As the judge called a recess, Jake stepped out into the hallway for some air. He was so lost in thought that he almost collided with someone rounding the corner. Watch where you're going, hero, a familiar voice sneered. Jake looked up to find Alex standing before him, a smirk playing on his lips. Jake's fists clenched at his sides, every muscle in his body tensing for a fight. What are you doing here, Alex? Jake managed to grind out. Alex's smirk widened. Just supporting a friend. Melissa needs all the help she can get, dealing with a vindictive ex like you. Jake barked out a laugh. Vindictive? That's rich. Coming from the man who slept with his best friend's wife, and then used insider information to try to ruin him financially. Alex's smirk faltered for a moment before he leaned in close, his voice low. Speaking of that, I've got a proposition for you. Drop this custody nonsense, forget about the insider trading, and there might be something in it for you. Say, a generous investment in your name? Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. Was Alex really trying to bribe him? In a courthouse, no less? You're unbelievable, Jake said, shaking his head. Do you really think you can buy your way out of this? Alex shrugged, his confidence seemingly unshakable. Everyone has a price, Jake. Even Boy Scouts like you. Think about it. This could all go away. You could have your life back, plus a little extra. All you have to do is walk away. For a brief moment, Jake was tempted. Not by the money, but by the idea of this all being over. No more court battles, no more sleepless nights worrying about Emma's future. But then he thought of Melissa's betrayal, of Alex's smug face, of the life he'd built being torn apart by their actions. Not everyone has a price, Alex, Jake said, his voice steady. Some of us still believe in doing what's right. As Alex opened his mouth to respond, Jake held up a hand. This conversation is over. And for the record, I've recorded every word of it. Add attempted bribery to the list of charges you'll be facing. The color drained from Alex's face as Jake walked away, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. He hadn't actually been recording, but Alex didn't need to know that. As he rejoined Sarah outside the courtroom, Jake felt a renewed sense of determination. He was going to win this, not just for himself or for Emma, but for every person who'd ever been betrayed by someone they trusted. The acrid smell of smoke hung heavy in the air as Jake stood at the edge of town, his eyes fixed on the approaching wall of flames. The wildfire that had been raging for weeks had finally reached the town limits, its orange tendrils licking at the outskirts of the community he had sworn to protect. Jake's radio crackled to life. Captain, we've got civilians trapped in the old mill on Maple Street. The fire's cutting off their escape route. Jake's jaw clenched. The old mill was a death trap, a relic from a bygone era that should have been torn down years ago. But there was no time for should-haves now. Copy that, Jake responded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. I'm on my way. Tell Johnson to bring the ladder truck around back. We're going in through the roof. As Jake raced towards the mill, his mind couldn't help but drift to Emma. His daughter was safe, evacuated with the rest of the town's children, but the thought of her kept him focused. He had to make it back to her. The mill loomed before him, smoke pouring from its windows. Jake could hear the screams of the trapped civilians, even over the roar of the fire. Without hesitation, he strapped on his breathing apparatus and began to climb. The heat was intense, the smoke thick and choking. Jake moved with practiced efficiency, years of training kicking in as he navigated the treacherous, burning structure. He found the first group of civilians huddled in a corner, terrified but alive. "Follow me," Jake shouted, his voice muffled by his mask. "Stay low and move quickly." One by one, he guided them to safety, passing them off to his team, waiting on the ladder truck. But as he turned to make one final sweep, he heard a faint cry from deeper within the building. Jake knew he should wait for backup, knew that every second he stayed in the burning mill increased his own danger. But that cry galvanized him. He plunged back into the inferno. He found her in what must have been an old office, a young woman no older than 20, her leg pinned beneath a fallen beam. The fire was closing in fast. "Hold on," Jake said, positioning himself beside the beam. "This is going to hurt, but I need you to pull yourself free when I lift this, okay?" The woman nodded, tears streaking her soot-stained face. Jake gritted his teeth and heaved, muscles straining against the weight of the beam. For a moment, he thought he wouldn't be able to do it, that they'd both die here in this burning hell. But then the beam shifted, and the woman scrambled free. Jake scooped her into his arms and ran, the building groaning and creaking around them. They burst out onto the roof just as the floor gave way behind them, flames licking at their heels. As they were lowered to safety, cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. Jake barely heard them, focused only on getting the woman to the waiting ambulance. It wasn't until he felt a hand on his shoulder that he looked up. The fire chief stood there, a look of pride on his weathered face. "Damn fine work, Captain," he said. "You just saved a lot of lives today." Jake nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. But as he looked around at the grateful faces of those he'd rescued, at his team who had followed him into danger without hesitation, he felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The local news crews descended on him like vultures, shoving microphones in his face and peppering him with questions. Jake answered as best he could, deflecting praise to his team and focusing on the importance of fire safety. As the adrenaline began to wear off, Jake couldn't help but think of Melissa and Alex. He wondered if they were watching, if they saw the man they had tried to destroy standing tall, a hero to the very community they had threatened to turn against him. But those thoughts were quickly pushed aside as the reality of the situation set in. The fire was still raging, and there was work to be done. Jake turned back to his team, ready to face whatever came next. Little did he know, across town Melissa and Alex were indeed watching, and they were plotting their next move. In the days that followed, Jake's face was plastered across every local news outlet. "Hero firefighter saves dozens in daring rescue," the headline screamed. Jake tried to avoid the attention, focusing instead on the ongoing efforts to contain the wildfire and protect the town. But the public adoration was impossible to ignore. People stopped him on the street to shake his hand or offer thanks. Local businesses put up signs praising the fire department, with Jake's name often singled out. It was during one of these encounters, as Jake was picking up coffee for his team, that he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. "Did you hear about that firefighter captain?" one woman whispered to another. "I heard his ex-wife is saying he was negligent, that he put lives at risk." Jake froze, his hand hovering over the cream dispenser. He listened intently as the women continued their gossip. "No," the other woman gasped, "but he's a hero. He saved all those people." The first woman shrugged. "That's what I heard. Apparently, there's evidence in everything." His ex and her new man brought it to the fire chief this morning. Jake's mind raced. Melissa and Alex. Of course, they couldn't stand to see him succeed, to see him overcome the mess they had made of his life. They were trying to discredit him, to tarnish his reputation just as it was at its peak. He left the coffee shop in a daze, his mind whirling with possibilities. What kind of evidence could they have fabricated? And more importantly, how could he prove it was false? As he approached the fire station, he saw a cluster of his colleagues gathered outside, speaking in hushed tones. They fell silent as he approached, exchanging uncomfortable glances. "What's going on?" Jake asked, though he already had a sinking feeling he knew. One of the younger firefighters, a rookie named Tommy, stepped forward. "Cap, there's some people here from the department. They're asking questions about the mill fire. About you. Jake nodded, his jaw set. Thanks, Tommy. I'll handle it. As he walked into the station, Jake steeled himself for what was to come. He had faced down raging infernos, had stared death in the face more times than he could count. He could handle whatever Melissa and Alex had thrown at him. Inside, he found the fire chief and two stern-looking men in suits. The chief's face was a mask of concern and disappointment. Jake, he said, his voice heavy. These gentlemen are from internal affairs. They have some questions about your conduct during the mill fire. Jake straightened his back, meeting their gazes squarely. Of course, he said. I'm an open book. For the next 2 hours, Jake answered question after question. They grilled him on his decision-making process, on the risks he took, on every minute detail of the rescue operation. Through it all, Jake remained calm and composed, his responses clear and honest. As the interrogation wound down, one of the IA men produced a folder. We have some documentation here, he said, his tone neutral. Maintenance records showing faulty equipment, reports of understaffing, even a suggestion that you were intoxicated on the job. Jake's eyes widened. The accusations were so outlandish, so far from the truth, that for a moment he was speechless. But then, as he looked at the documents, a detail caught his eye. A signature, hastily scrawled at the bottom of one of the forms. He'd know that handwriting anywhere. May I? He asked, reaching for the folder. The IA man hesitated, then nodded. Jake flipped through the documents, his firefighter's eye for detail, catching inconsistencies and errors that someone unfamiliar with the department's procedures might have missed. And there, on nearly every page, were little tells, Melissa's distinctive, Alex's habit of dotting his I's with a dash instead of a point. He looked up at the IA men, a smile on his face. Gentlemen, he said, I think you've been had. These documents are forgeries, and I can prove it. For the next hour, Jake methodically went through each piece of evidence, pointing out discrepancies and errors that proved they were fakes. He called in members of his team, who corroborated his version of events and vouched for his character and professionalism. By the time he was done, even the IA men looked convinced. The fire chief's face had transformed from disappointment to anger, not at Jake, but at those who had tried to smear one of his best men. I want a full investigation into the source of these documents, the chief growled. And Jake, I owe you an apology. We should have trusted you. Jake nodded, accepting the apology with grace. But inside, a fire of his own was burning. Melissa and Alex had crossed a line. They hadn't just attacked him personally this time. They had put his entire team, the whole department, under scrutiny. They had jeopardized the trust that the community placed in its firefighters. As he watched the IA men leave, their tails between their legs, Jake made a decision. It was time to end this, once and for all. He had been playing defense for too long. Now, it was time to go on the offensive. The courthouse stood imposing and austere, its stone facade a silent witness to countless human dramas. Today, it would bear witness to the culmination of Jake's long struggle against betrayal and deceit. Jake straightened his tie, a gesture more of nervousness than vanity. Beside him, his lawyer, Sarah Blackwood, gave him a reassuring nod. We've got this, Jake, she said, her voice low and confident. The evidence is overwhelming. Jake nodded, but said nothing. He couldn't shake the feeling that Melissa and Alex had one last trick up their sleeves. They had proven time and again that they were willing to go to any lengths to destroy him. As they entered the courtroom, Jake's eyes immediately found Melissa and Alex. They sat on the opposite side, Melissa's face a mask of feigned innocence, Alex's set in a sneer of defiance. Jake felt a momentary surge of anger, quickly suppressed. He couldn't let emotion cloud his judgment now. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Sarah presented their case methodically, laying out the evidence of Melissa's infidelity, paternity fraud, Alex's insider trading, and their recent attempt to discredit Jake with forged documents. Jake watched as Melissa's composure cracked, her eyes darting nervously around the room as the weight of her actions was laid bare. Alex, for his part, maintained his arrogant demeanor, but Jake could see the beads of sweat forming on his brow. When it came time for Jake to testify, he spoke clearly and calmly, recounting the betrayal he had suffered and the struggle to rebuild his life and protect his daughter. As he spoke about Emma, he saw a flicker of something, regret, shame, cross Melissa's face. The defense's case was weak, full of excuses and attempts to shift blame. Jake could see the judge's expression growing increasingly skeptical as Melissa and Alex's lawyer grasped at straws. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge cleared his throat. Having reviewed all the evidence and testimony presented, I'm prepared to render my decision, he began, his voice grave. Jake held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. In the matter of custody for the minor child, Emma Buford, I hereby grant full custody to the plaintiff, Jake Buford. A wave of relief washed over Jake. Emma was safe. She would be with him, away from the toxic influence of Melissa's betrayal. But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, in the matter of the paternity fraud lawsuit, I find in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant, Melissa Buford, is ordered to pay damages in the amount of $500,000. Jake heard Melissa's sharp intake of breath, saw her reach out to clutch Alex's arm. But the judge still wasn't done. Lastly, I am referring the evidence of embezzlement and insider trading to the district attorney's office for further investigation and potential criminal charges. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Jake sat still, almost unable to believe it was over. They had won. Not just won, but triumphed completely. As the judge's gavel fell, bringing the proceedings to a close, Jake finally allowed himself to smile. He turned to Sarah, shaking her hand firmly. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Sarah smiled back. "You did the hard part, Jake. You stood strong in the face of it all. Now go be with your daughter." As Jake left the courthouse, he was met by a crowd of reporters, all clamoring for a statement. For a moment, he considered brushing past them, eager to get to Emma. But then he stopped, facing the cameras squarely. "Today, justice was served," he began, his voice steady. "But this isn't just about me. It's about every person who's ever been betrayed by someone they trusted. It's about standing up for what's right, no matter the cost." He paused, thinking of the long, hard road that had brought him to this point. "I'm grateful for the court's decision, but the real victory here is the truth coming to light. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a daughter to hug." As Jake walked away, leaving the reporters calling questions behind him, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't just the legal battles that were over. He had faced his demons, had stared down the betrayal and pain, and had come out stronger. Later that evening, as Jake sat in his living room, Emma curled up asleep beside him, he thought about the future. The settlement money was substantial, more than he had ever expected. An idea began to form in his mind. The next morning, Jake made a call to his lawyer. "Sarah, I need your help setting something up," he said. "I want to use part of the settlement to start a support group for men who've been through similar situations. Paternity fraud, betrayal, false accusations. I want to help them fight back, to know they're not alone." Sarah's voice was warm with approval. "That's a wonderful idea, Jake. I'll get the paperwork started right away." As he hung up the phone, Jake felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in a long time. He had won his battle, but there were others out there still fighting. He could help them, could use his experience to guide them through the darkness he had emerged from. For the first time in months, Jake allowed himself to truly relax. He had his daughter, his integrity, and a new mission. Melissa and Alex were facing the consequences of their actions. The future, which had seemed so bleak not long ago, now shone bright with possibility. Little did Jake know, the final act of this drama was yet to unfold. Melissa and Alex, backed into a corner and facing ruin, were about to make one last, desperate move. The fire station was quiet in the pre-dawn hours, the air thick with the lingering smell of smoke from the now-contained wildfire. Jake sat at his desk, poring over reports and planning the day's assignments. The victory in court had energized him, and he threw himself into his work with renewed vigor. A noise from the apparatus bay caught his attention. Frowning, Jake rose from his desk. The station was staffed, of course, but most of the crew was either asleep or out on a medical call. Who could be out there at this hour? As he stepped into the bay, the sight that greeted him made his blood run cold. Melissa and Alex stood there, their faces contorted with a mixture of anger and desperation. Alex held a gas can, the acrid smell of accelerant already filling the air. "What the hell are you doing?" Jake demanded, his voice sharp with disbelief and anger. Melissa's laugh was bitter, tinged with hysteria. "What does it look like, Jake? We're burning it all down, just like you did to us." Jake's mind raced, assessing the situation. The station was old, the wood dry. If they started a fire here, it could spread quickly, endangering not just the building but the surrounding neighborhood. Think about what you're doing, Jake said, keeping his voice calm despite the fury and fear coursing through him. This isn't just about me. You're putting innocent lives at risk. Alex sneered, sloshing the contents of the gas can. Should have thought about that before you ruined us. Do you have any idea what you've done? I'm facing prison. Melissa's lost everything. This is your fault. Jake took a step forward, his hands raised placatingly. It's not too late to stop this. Whatever you're feeling, this isn't the answer. Think about Emma Melissa. What would she say if she saw you now? At the mention of Emma's name, Melissa faltered, the manic gleam in her eyes dimming slightly. But Alex was too far gone, consumed by rage and the fear of what awaited him. Enough talk, Alex snarled, flicking open a lighter. The small flame danced, a harbinger of the destruction to come. Jake's training kicked in. In one fluid motion, he lunged forward, tackling Alex to the ground. The lighter skittered across the floor, its flame extinguishing. Melissa screamed, the sound piercing the pre-dawn quiet. The commotion roused the sleeping firefighters. They rushed into the bay, taking in the scene with professional speed. Call the police, Jake shouted, struggling to keep Alex pinned. The man fought like a wild animal, all reason gone in his desperation. Melissa stood frozen, the reality of what they'd almost done crashing over her. As two firefighters moved to restrain her, she offered no resistance, her eyes locked on Jake and Alex's struggle. In their frantic scuffle, Alex's elbow caught the gas can, knocking it over. Fuel spilled across the floor, the fumes rising thickly in the enclosed space. We need to evacuate, Jake called out, his voice strained as he fought to subdue Alex. Get everyone out now. The station's alarm blared to life, its shrill cry echoing through the building. Firefighters moved with practiced efficiency, securing equipment and ensuring everyone was accounted for. As Jake finally managed to get Alex in a firm hold, he looked up to see flames licking at the spilled gasoline. In their struggle, they must have struck a spark. Fire! Jake yelled, hauling Alex to his feet. Move, move, move. The evacuation was orderly but urgent. Jake, still gripping Alex tightly, was one of the last to exit the building. As they stumbled into the cool night air, Jake could hear the approaching sirens of police and additional fire units. He watched in dismay as flames began to engulf the station, the place that had been his second home for so many years. But there was no time for sentiment. Lives were at stake. With Alex secure by his colleagues, Jake sprang into action. He barked orders, organizing his team to contain the blaze before it could spread to neighboring structures. As Jake directed the firefighting efforts, he couldn't help but notice the irony. Here he was, saving Melissa and Alex from a disaster of their own making, just as he had saved so many others throughout his career. The fire raged on, consuming the old wooden structure with voracious appetite. Jake and his team fought valiantly, their movements a well-choreographed dance of hoses, ladders, and axes. Hours passed in a blur of heat, smoke, and exertion. Finally, as the sun began to peek over the horizon, they brought the fire under control. The station was a total loss, but they had prevented the blaze from spreading. Exhausted, soot-stained, and reeking of smoke, Jake surveyed the smoldering ruins. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. The fire had destroyed the physical reminders of his old life, but from the ashes, he would rise anew. He turned to see Melissa and Alex being led away in handcuffs, their faces a mixture of shame, fear, and defeat. As they passed him, Melissa paused, her eyes meeting Jake's. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the aftermath of the fire. For everything. Jake nodded, too drained to speak. He watched as they were placed in separate police cars and driven away, out of his life for good. The fire chief approached, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. You did good, son. Saved a lot of lives today. Jake managed a weak smile. Just doing my job, Chief. As the scene cleared and the investigation began, Jake found himself standing alone amidst the chaos. He pulled out his phone, dialing a familiar number. Emma? It's Dad. I'm okay, sweetheart. There's been a fire, but I'm fine. I'll be home soon. As he hung up, Jake took a deep breath. The air still smelled of smoke, but underneath it he could detect the faintest hint of something new. Hope, perhaps, or the promise of a fresh start. He looked around at his team, at the community members who had gathered to offer support, at the rising sun painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. These were his people now. This was his life. Jake straightened his shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. He had weathered betrayal, fought through adversity, and emerged stronger. The fire that Melissa and Alex had set, both literally and figuratively, had not consumed him. Instead, it had forged him anew. As he walked towards the gathered crowd, Jake felt a sense of peace settle over him. The long nightmare was finally over. He had his daughter, his integrity, and a community that stood behind him. The future, once so uncertain, now stretched before him full of possibility. Jake allowed himself a small smile. He was ready for whatever life had in store for him next. After all, he had faced the flames and emerged unscathed. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would meet them head-on with the same courage and determination that had brought him through this ordeal. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its warm light washing over the scene. As Jake began to coordinate the cleanup efforts, he knew that this was not an end, but a beginning. A new chapter in a life that had been tested by fire and found unbreakable.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
I took nuclear revenge on my boss who cheated with my wife and then filed for divorce. A 20-hour journey from Singapore to O'Hare International with a layover in Taipei was barely better than economy class. Even on my birthday, I wasn't fazed by returning to Chicago for a tough meeting with our international stocks head and shares trading desk. What worried me was anticipating what awaited me at home. We landed just after 8:30 a.m., and I took a shuttle to the nearby Chicago Sheraton and Suites Hotel. Having booked the room the night before, it was ready for immediate check-in. After dropping my belongings, I showered and hit the gym. I worked out for an hour, then took a long, hot shower followed by a cold rinse to wake up fully. Despite the chilly April weather in Chicago, I endured the cold until my teeth chattered, then warmed up with hot water. Feeling refreshed, I went to the restaurant for an American breakfast I'd missed for months. After devouring pancakes, scrambled eggs, bacon, and sausage drenched in maple syrup, and 4 cups of coffee, I headed to my 10:30 appointment at J.P. Morgan on Dearborn Avenue. I took the elevator to the 8th floor, showed my ID, and was escorted to a small conference room. They kept me waiting for over 17 minutes, during which I didn't move a muscle. From my trips to Asia, I learned to show no fear or weakness. Joe Rutledge, VP of International Stock and Commodities Traders, and Samuel Young, our corporate lawyer, eventually entered. Their presence signaled someone was getting fired, and it was me. "Adam," Joe began without a handshake, motioning me to sit. The confrontation began. "What happened in Singapore?" Joe demanded. "We sent you to stabilize things, and you approved a $300 million purchase of a new company's stock with no solid data." "Yes," I replied. "Yes to what?" Joe's face reddened. "Yes, it's in my report. The CEO and management team are top-notch with 200 years of experience. The project, 50 years in the making, is confirmed by Deloitte and KPMG. The aquaculture project is technologically advanced and has real potential." "Then why is their share price falling?" he asked. "It went public at $17 a share and now it's $9.55 and you bought more." "Yes, because it will rebound. If it reaches $25, we'll profit significantly, Joe. We own 25% of the shares, making us the largest shareholder in the company," I retorted. "Because competitors are short-selling to sink the company or buy it cheaply. We need to stand our ground." "It's a failure," he said. "We need to trade on confidence and maintain a positive risk ratio." "It's all in my report," I reiterated. "Your report is wishful thinking," he said. "The council has approved my recommendation. You're out." Samuel offered me 3 months' salary and nearly 30 days of accrued vacation, totaling almost 5 months of pay. They also cashed in my stock options, bringing my total payout to nearly $800,000, but leaving me with a tarnished reputation and bleak job prospects. By 2 a.m., I had signed all the forms, rolled my 401k into an IRA, returned all company materials, and was escorted out. Standing on the sidewalk with an empty satchel, I felt like I might collapse. I rushed to catch a cab back to the hotel, imagining strangers watching me die on the street. In my room, I mixed whiskey with 7-Up and ice, a sacrilege I needed. I sat down to think. At 42, I was too young to retire but unsure if I could start over. I decided I needed courage. I bought a new laptop, installed the necessary software, and began working. I transferred $50,000 from savings and liquidated some investments, preparing to move over $1,200,000 into an offshore trading account called Blue Sky International. By 9 a.m., I ordered a hamburger and beer from room service. My phone had been off for 36 hours. Exhausted, I decided to relax, watch the news, and avoid dealing with everything. Eventually, jet lag caught up with me and I fell asleep. The next morning, I had an early breakfast and turned on my phone. It was flooded with messages. Help Dad. Mom is having a breakdown from Dean and Katie. What's going on with Jean? From my dad, birthday wishes from Jean's parents, my kids, and Team Singapore, but nothing from Jean. It felt like I didn't exist. I caught the 8:30 flight to Springfield and arrived home to chaos. The living room was a mess with games, soda cans, and plates everywhere. The kitchen sink was clogged, and the dishwasher and trash can were overflowing. The laundry room was piled with dirty clothes. I spent 3 hours cleaning and organizing, noticing 2 empty wine bottles with different lipstick marks in the living room. Our bedroom needed fresh sheets and ventilation. The kids' rooms were dirty but slightly better. Finally, I went to my office to check the Southeast Asia aquaculture stock. It had dropped to $9.37, almost 2 points down for the day. Now it was time to see if I had the courage to enter the market. I called my dad. My mom had died 5 years ago from breast cancer. We talked about Jean. He said she seemed sad and depressed recently. She was heartbroken for no clear reason. I checked our bank transactions and home phone messages but found nothing unusual. After folding clothes, I checked for dinner options and found little. I reconnected the battery to my Audi A6, started it, and went to the supermarket for groceries to make Thai green curry and jasmine rice. I boiled rice with water, coconut milk, and ginger for flavor. I stir-fried chicken strips with zucchini, Asian eggplant, lemongrass, garlic, Asian basil, and cilantro. I added coconut milk, green curry paste, lime zest and juice, fish sauce, and a bit of sugar. I garnished the dish with spring onions, coriander, and basil leaves, set the table, and poured a beer. Jean arrived and the kids ran inside, excited to see me. I hugged and kissed them, telling them how much I missed them. Katie cried in my arms, and Dean, more reserved, hugged me too. Jean watched us with a wistful look, then kissed me gently. "Welcome home, Adam," she said without much enthusiasm. "That smells nice. What is it?" "Thai green curry," I replied. Dean and Katie were curious. "It smells really good," Dean said, hugging me again. "Go clean up for dinner," Jean instructed. Afterward, she hugged and kissed me. "You look exhausted, Adam. Why are you back so soon?" "I got fired," I admitted. She blushed, fumbling for words. "We'll figure something out, but what about you?" She seemed distant, more like an acquaintance than my wife. "Are you okay?" "It's work," she said, trying to smile. "The market's down and there's a lot of pressure at M." She gestured to show the extent of the pressure. The kids returned, and we gathered for dinner. I served the meal, poured wine for Jean and me, and Dean had Mountain Dew while Kathy had water. We ate together for the first time in 4 months. I shared stories about Singapore and team-building activities like dragon boat races and combat archery. After dinner, Dean and Kathy surprised me with a wrapped present. "Happy birthday, Dad," they said, bringing tears to Jean's eyes. I kissed my kids as Jean exclaimed, "Oh my God, Adam, I'm so sorry, I totally forgot." I resisted reminding her of the gold diamond earrings I got her for her birthday and focused on the kids. I opened my present, a Band of Brothers DVD set. I loved that show and had always wanted the collection. I kissed the kids again, our smiles matching from the joy of giving and receiving. Jean, embarrassed and remorseful, promised to get me a gift the next day. "You don't have to," I said. "Being home with my family is all I need." Dean and Katie hugged me again, saying, "Love you, Daddy." We talked at the table for over an hour, but eventually the kids had to do their homework while Jean and I cleaned up the kitchen. "What's going on, Jean? You're not yourself," I asked. She hesitated, then admitted, "I don't know, Adam. I'm depressed. You've always traveled so much, and the last time was too long. We hardly lived the same life." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I feel lost." I hugged her, and after some resistance, she let me hold her as she sobbed softly. She was right. My job had kept me away for years. We had agreed to make sacrifices for an early retirement, but it was taking a toll. Jean suggested I spend time with the kids. I helped Katie with her homework, did the same with Dean, then tucked Katie into bed. Dean confided, "Mom's not okay, Dad. She's crying and not doing much around the house. I think she's having a nervous breakdown." There were tears in his eyes. "Please fix it, Dad." I nodded, though I had no idea what to do. As I went downstairs, I heard Jean on the phone. She ended the call abruptly when she saw me. "Who was that?" I asked. "One of the girls from the office," she replied, looking defiant. She seemed angry but wouldn't discuss it. Exhausted, I checked the Singapore Stock Exchange. California was trading at $9.90, a slight increase. I went upstairs, waited for Jean to finish in the bathroom, then got ready for bed. When I reached for her, she tensed but then pressed against me. "Please just hold me," she whispered. I held her for a long time, feeling something was fundamentally wrong. Was it the long separation? Had she fallen out of love or in love with someone else? Was she sick? These thoughts swirled until I finally fell asleep. I woke up at 4:30, feeling tired and sick. I went for a run and planned to buy melatonin to reset my body clock. After an hour, I returned to find Jean gone, leaving a note asking me to feed the kids and take them to school. I checked my bank account, saw the money from JP Morgan had cleared, and transferred it to my offshore account. I checked the CA shares, which were now trading at $8.99, slowly declining. I had to choose between fixing my marriage or securing my financial future. Could I do both? I spent time with Dean and Kathy, asking about their activities while I was away. They mentioned spending time with Jean's boss, Anthony Miller, and his daughter, Evelyn, doing things like miniature golf and movies. Dean noticed my concern and defended the time spent with Evelyn, saying they felt like one big happy family. I assured them I was glad they enjoyed themselves and proposed a summer vacation. They were excited, and I hugged and kissed them before driving them to school. Then I called George Tallis, my old mentor, to discuss my situation. George, still a registered broker, agreed to review the CA prospectus I sent him. Later, I stopped by a pharmacy near St. John's Hospital and saw Jean and Evelyn Miller leaving the hospital, looking distraught. They seemed deeply connected in their grief. I wondered if Jean or Evelyn was sick or if they were mourning a mutual acquaintance. The sight left me unsettled, but I proceeded to my meetings. At my first meeting, Julian Knowles said he'd discussed the CA investment with his club. At the second, Aaron Goldstein quickly agreed to invest $10 million after the paperwork. George called, saying he had interested investors, and we agreed on a sliding commission structure. I then called my dad to discuss the CA opportunity, and he decided to invest $100,000. When I explained Jean's behavior, he suggested it resembled someone in mourning. We ruled out her parents and siblings, considering her cousins were distant. Dad then gave me the number of a private investigator they had used for insurance fraud cases. I went home, California'd my contacts in Singapore and Southeast Asia for updates, and recreated the risk assessment profile for CA. The results matched my report: rational numbers, a solid management team, and an early-stage project. Importantly, the management team had invested their own money, strengthening my position. Everything was set for SGX to open, and I would start trading. While waiting, I contacted a private investigator, Clarence Williams, who had a slow Southern accent but a sharp mind. He required a $5,000 advance and would start the next day. I drank coffee, waiting for the time to pass. Dean and Kathy came home late from sports practice, and I spent time with them but explained my important business. Jean arrived, looking tired but more determined. "I bought Chinese food on the way home," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "Are you working?" she asked. "Hi, Jean," I replied. No affectionate words came from her, so I didn't respond either. "I have to work tonight from about 7, okay?" I replied. "I have a present for your birthday," she said, handing me a small gift-wrapped package. The card read, "Happy birthday, Adam. Love, Jean." Inside was a bottle of Hugo Boss aftershave. I thanked her and she kissed my dry lips. We ate as a family. Dean and Kathy talked about their day, and Jean mentioned some changes during my absence, like her boss, Anthony Miller, converting his house into a shelter for misused teens. I was surprised, as I thought he was more of a country club type. His wife, Lynn, started it before she died, Jean said. He used to use empty houses he owned, but now wants a permanent establishment. "Why now?" I asked. She became impassive. "Now the opportunity has presented itself," she said, nodding. "That's a great idea." "Springfield could use it," I said, smiling. She smiled back, and we cleaned up together. Despite my pleasant expression, I sensed she was hiding something. After cleanup, I told her I was going to work in my office. With an hour before trading opened in Singapore, I sat at my desk thinking about my marriage and trying to keep my sanity. Jean and I had once been compatible in every way, but the past few years had been difficult due to my frequent traveling. Usually we planned for my return, leading to many honeymoons, but not this time. The situation made me angry. In Singapore and South Asia, many women sought relationships with foreign men for various reasons, and I was hit on daily. However, I turned them down because I was married to a woman I loved. But recent events made me question our relationship. Reflecting on any warning signs, I realized that aside from a breakdown in communication over the past few weeks, there wasn't much. But now, I had to focus on the work at hand. When the Singapore market opened, California was trading at $8.49. With over $30 million to invest, I cautiously began buying stocks. Despite my purchases, the price kept falling as investors tried to offload their shares. I suspected my old company was dumping shares. I kept buying, expecting the price to stabilize, but it plummeted to $5.61. With our $30 million, we bought over 10% of the shares, allowing us to appoint someone to the board of directors. I called George, and we celebrated over whiskey, an 18-year-old J.P. Weiser for me and a 10-year-old Bully Bourbon for George. Our purchases encouraged other investors to buy at the bargain price, and by the time I logged off, the price had climbed to $8.72, stranding short sellers. It was almost 2 a.m. I quickly cleaned up and went to bed, finally passing out from the melatonin pills. The next morning, I woke up late. Dean and Kathy were finishing breakfast, and Jean was on the phone saying, "Time is of the essence." She ended the call when she saw me. "Working, Jean?" I asked. She shrugged exaggeratedly and poured me a cup of coffee. "You must have been up late." I nodded, sipping my coffee. "Did the trade go well?" she asked. I mimicked her shrug, keeping my worries about California to myself. "It's still early. We'll have to wait and see." "Okay." She kissed my cheek. "You look tired. I'll take the kids to school." She left, calling out to Dean and Kathy. They shouted, "Bye and love you, Daddy," as they left. I poured another cup and headed to my office, pleased to see the stock closed at $10.14 after a late rally. It was time to stabilize the stock away from hostile games. I washed my face and started emailing and making calls, first checking the Miller Real Estate website. It promoted its social responsibility program, New Horizon House, helping troubled teens. I found Anthony Miller's Facebook, filled with pictures of cars, vacations, and a recent corporate event photo with Gene holding his hand, looking at him instead of the photographer. It was curious, but not definitive. Gene's Facebook was mostly old family photos with nothing much recent. Evelyn's Facebook showed many pictures with Gene over the years, some with Anthony too, but nothing inappropriate. Her recent posts were cryptic about life and prayers. I called Clarence Williams to expedite the investigation, but he said it would take time. I called my father, who advised against jumping to conclusions and to let the experts handle it. He told me to be patient. I was torn. Should I try to fix my marriage, risking more heartache if I was being played, or do nothing and regret it later? I called a lawyer who advised that fixing the marriage was usually better than divorce. I had one more idea. I contacted a former colleague of Gene's, Chad, who owed me a favor. He agreed to meet for lunch at Red Robin. He walked in, looking every bit the realtor in his golf shirt, chinos, and Dockers. After small talk over burgers, I got down to business. "So, you're fishing for information, Adam?" Chad laughed. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm trying to understand something about Em. Something's been bothering me." Chad turned serious. "Everything changed when Tony lost his wife to cancer. He lost his drive for a while, but his daughter took over and he eventually found his footing again." He looked at me shrewdly. "Your wife?" She became very close to him, often referred to as his office wife. I gestured for him to continue, my throat tight. I didn't see anything inappropriate, but office gossip can be cruel. "Tony, Evelyn, and your wife spent a lot of time together, but you weren't home much, were you?" I shrugged. We talked about it without adding anything new. Chad was about to leave when he remembered something. "Did you know Anthony was rumored to have cancer?" We said goodbye, and I called St. John's Hospital, asking for Anthony Miller's room. He was in the oncology ward. I paid for lunch and headed home with a lot to think about. That evening, I went outside with whiskey and a cigar. Jean joined me with a glass of wine. "Can we talk, Adam?" "Shoot. You went on the M website," she accused. "Why does it matter?" "Why did you go to the company's website, and I assume you've checked everyone's Facebook pages too?" She glared at me, daring me to argue. We'd been married long enough for me to recognize the signs. "What did you expect to find?" "Exactly what I found." "And what was that?" "Why are you questioning me, Jean? Social media isn't private." I laughed, and she blushed. "Evelyn said you checked her Instagram." "Really?" "Yeah." She tried to stay calm. "Why are you acting like this?" "How like this? Or why?" I blew smoke in her direction, knowing she hated it. She waved it away, spilling wine on her blouse. "Please stop, Adam." She began to cry. Normally I would have hugged her, but not this time. "Why are you crying, Jean?" "You're upsetting me with your behavior, Adam." She grew louder, but I let out more smoke. "Who are you?" I asked. She struggled for words. "I am your wife, Adam Carter." "That's who I am." I stepped back as she gasped and ran into the house. I finished my drink and went to my office. CA's stock was rising to $11.92. George and I agreed it was a trend, not a spike. I monitored the market, noticing CA was the only stock with significant upward movement. A JP Morgan team member admitted they dumped half the stock at 50 cents on the dollar. My former boss, Joe Rutledge, suggested holding the rest as the trend looked positive. We laughed. He hinted that JP Morgan might rehire me and fire Rutledge. That night, I slept on the couch in my office. The next morning, I saw California closed at $13. The trend continued, and our investors doubled their money. If it reached $25, we'd see a 300% profit. I made breakfast, drank coffee, and called the kids to eat, ignoring Jean all morning. After dropping them off at school, I went to the gym and then to IHOP for a late breakfast. I made some calls and had a 2-hour meeting with George. When I got home, we discussed starting a combined brokerage with offices in Springfield and Chicago. George would work on the structure and equity while I developed a market plan. I was drafting the plan when Jean came in alone. I left Kathy and Dean at the Beckers for the night. We need to talk. She poured me a bourbon and herself a glass of wine. We sat in the living room and I waited for her to speak first. I don't know what you think I've been doing while you've been away, Adam. I haven't thought about anything yet. Well, you're being very disrespectful and ugly to me. Is that how you feel? I raised an eyebrow. Disrespectful. She nodded, then apologized. You're not home anymore. We're like two strangers. So after 17 years, we're strangers because I've been gone for 4 months? All the Skypes, texts, and phone calls didn't matter. There was a lot of pressure on me, and you were far away. She wiped her tears. But you're my husband, and I'm your wife, and that's all that matters. She stood up and walked away. I sat there, sipping my bourbon, wondering if she had lost her mind. I heard her on the phone, then the murmur of water from the bathtub. Later, she came downstairs wearing a gray dress, black shoes, and a string of pearls I'd bought her. Go take a shower and get dressed, she said. I'll make a reservation at Chesapeake Seafood Restaurant. I got ready in 15 minutes, ignoring my suspicion that she was on the phone again. At the restaurant, she had a gin and tonic, and I ordered a Singapore gin sling. We talked about the kids over Chardonnay and appetizers. She seemed unconcerned about me losing my job. You're one of the smartest people I know, Adam. I believe you'll find a job quickly. She smiled at me. She had no idea our future depended on California. The evening improved as we discussed friends, parents, and everyday topics. When our main courses arrived, I ordered the captain's platter, and she had lobster. She treated me to wine, and we enjoyed each other's company. If she was having an affair, she hid it well. We finished our meal and went home. I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. Jean was making breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon, and English muffins. We ate together, discussing chores around the house. After breakfast, she went to pick up Dean and Kathy. I was in the backyard when my phone rang. It was Clarence Williams. Can you talk? He asked, and my heart sank. We arranged to meet at a downtown coffee shop. I left my work, cleaned up, and met him. He waved when he saw me. He was nothing like I expected. Unlike the detectives on TV, he was a small, unassuming man, no more than 5 feet 6 inches, thin, gray-haired, and balding. He wore dark pants, a shirt, and an old sports jacket, and even his shoes looked like they were from Walmart. He probably drove a Toyota. However, his high-end cell phone didn't match his outward appearance, and his firm handshake revealed his true nature. He got straight to the point. Mr. Carter, we didn't catch your wife at a hotel or in any secret meetings, he said, holding up a hand to stop me from interrupting. But we have ample evidence she's been having an affair with her boss, Anthony Miller, for at least 2 years. It's an open secret in the office. His daughter, Evelyn, knows and facilitates it. Your wife often left the kids with friends to spend weekends with him when you were away. His words hit hard and my pulse quickened. My hands clutched the table as if I were having a heart attack. Hearing the truth from a stranger was devastating. Clarence continued, but I could barely hear him. Miller has been diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer and has only a few months to live. What? I asked, trying to process. He's undergoing therapy, but it's not working. He has metastatic pancreatic cancer. This confirmed what Chad had hinted at. Jean's behavior suddenly made sense. She was mourning the man she loved and trying to cope with his impending passing. I shared my thoughts with Clarence, needing someone to talk to. Clarence's next words confirmed my initial impression of his depth. Cheaters often try to minimize their actions by saying it was just physical, engaging. But that's nonsense, Mr. Carter. They're invested in the relationship. Women need to feel loved. Long-term affairs are about more than physical engagement. They involve sharing experiences, hopes, and dreams. They develop a personal language and justify their actions by finding faults in their spouses. I was devastated. My wife was in a relationship with another man. giving him her full attention and enjoying the good times without the burdens of daily life. He provided her with the excitement missing from our marriage. We talked more and agreed to pause the investigation while I considered my next steps. After he left, I sat and pondered my life. One thing was clear: my marriage was over. The idea of staying together for the children no longer made sense. As difficult as it was to face, I knew that many children in the U.S. live in separated or divorced families, and mine would be no different. I sipped my cooling coffee, feeling real pain inside. Jean and Miller would pay for this. I tried to muffle my emotions. Anger, hurt, and anguish wouldn't help. I thought back to my work in the Far East, where old-style executives viewed business and life in multi-generational terms, much like Southern Europeans. When two families went to war, there was no reprieve until one was wiped out. But I wasn't a triad leader or mafia boss, just an ordinary man living an ordinary life. I had no superpowers or omnipotent allies. I asked for more coffee and pondered how to get revenge on a dying man. As for Jean, it was simple: take everything she valued. First, I had to deal with Miller. He wasn't married to me, but he disrespected my marriage and family. My anger flared up again. At work, psychological evaluations revealed two traits: I was risk-averse and stubborn to the point of intransigence. These traits drove me now. I would retaliate regardless of the consequences, and not back down until one side was defeated, even if it was me. An embryo of a plan began to form. I called Clarence and asked him to find troubled women the Millers had helped. It was another fishing trip, but I was aiming big. In 2014, during a trip to Kenya, I joined a local team for deep-sea fishing in the Indian Ocean. I learned that to catch a marlin, you first catch small fish like bonito, use them as live bait, and then catch the marlin. That lesson gave me a plan. I drove home, did breathing exercises to calm down, and pretended I was in the same mood as before. Jean wasn't home, so I finished my tasks. Later, she returned with Dean and Kathy, and we grilled steaks and corn on the cob, made coleslaw, and warmed baguettes. I spent the day as a loving father and husband, but inside, I was a cynical fool. Cynical Adam decided Jean was doing damage control because her lover was dying. I was her backup plan. My time with Dean and Kathy was real, but my time with Jean was like a B-movie. Cynical Adam reminded me to keep this in mind during the divorce and when looking for new relationships. The next few days were strange, living a lie and watching myself play a role. On a positive note, George and I sorted out the new trading organization, registered it in Singapore, and transferred the CA portfolio. California was now trading at $16.33. I became paranoid. I added security measures requiring a fingerprint and password, encrypted all my files and emails, and always turned off my laptop. I deleted all emails not from George without opening them, uploaded needed files to the cloud, reformatted my phone, and re-uploaded necessary data. I researched other interesting stocks and contacted potential investors from JP Morgan, confident that the layoff nullified my non-compete clause. On Thursday, Clarence delivered the ammunition I was waiting for, a flash drive containing information on 14 women the Millers had helped. The handover happened at a different coffee shop due to my heightened paranoia. The flash drive included brief bios and old photos. 5 women still lived locally. 1, Leah, worked as an escort. I bought a cell phone, called her, and arranged to meet at a motel. Leah arrived on time, small, thin, and tattooed. "Show me the money," she said. I placed $200 on the bed and asked, "How do you feel about making a statement?" She initially refused. But when I clarified that I wanted information, she agreed to talk. Leah recounted her story. She left home after school, ended up on the streets, and began selling herself for food and lodging. After a traumatic incident, she was taken to the hospital and then to Mrs. Miller's house, where she stayed for 6 months before leaving due to boredom with the rules. I asked if she experienced bullying at the house. She hesitated, then asked how much. I offered $5,000. She negotiated skillfully, asking for $20,000 to help her and her daughter start anew. I promised her a job in Chicago if everything worked out. And her eyes lit up. "For real?" she asked, both hopeful and scared. I reassured her and we agreed on a plan. We exchanged numbers, with her saving mine under the name Jerry. Phase 1 was complete. At home, I maintained my facade and Jean seemed to buy it. She was too focused on the Miller Legacy project to notice much else. I gathered as much information as I could without raising suspicion. We cooked and ate together like old times. During breakfast, she mentioned she'd be busy with New Horizons House and that the grand opening was on Monday at 10. I already knew from the company website and social media. I feigned interest and subtly questioned her, learning the mayor and local media would attend. Did they stop the chemo and radiation so Tony could feel well enough to attend? she asked someone, probably Evelyn. She then sobbed slightly. It's going to be a life-changing moment, she said. Not if I can help it, I thought. My divorce papers were ready, awaiting permission to file. Illinois was a no-fault state, so it was a matter of irreconcilable differences. I started the day checking the SGX. Our stock had reached its issue price and was rising, a good start to Friday. I listened to WMA radio at 9:30, where Evelyn discussed the New Horizons House, praising its social responsibility and calling for community participation and donations. Then a hesitant caller broke the smooth narrative. Through sobs, she revealed, "Please don't believe the House helped anyone. It allowed Mr. Miller to misuse women." Evelyn denied it vehemently, defending her father. The caller continued, "He did, and more than once. I'm a strumpet now, thanks to your precious daddy. My name is Leah, and your father ruined me." The connection cut off, and the station went to a commercial break. When they returned, the host was torn between continuing the original interview and addressing the shocking revelation. Evelyn tried to explain it away, but the lines were ringing with listeners' reactions. Some defended Leah, while others dismissed her as trying to make a buck. Another caller, Rita, said, "Anthony Miller misused me too," adding more fuel to the fire. A married woman with children called in, sobbing that Miller had stressed her too and forced her to do things she couldn't refuse. She disconnected, leaving a long silence before the host, who sounded like he was crying, could speak. The public reaction was a mix of outrage and defense, turning a low-interest story into an emotional storm. I called Vicky, an old high school friend who works at the local newspaper and anchors the news for 2 regional radio stations. I asked if she had heard about what was happening on WMA and WTX. She had. I told her I was concerned because my wife works for MRE in the New Horizon Home Project. She wasn't sure but said she would look into it, noting that if true, it would be the biggest misuse case in Springfield in 2 generations. By lunchtime, the story had quieted on the air, but social media and Twitter went wild. Initially, opinions were split evenly, but soon it became a fierce witch hunt against Miller. Thousands of women shared their misuse stories. Some were detailed, others just Me Too, and some were graphic. The information went viral globally. I passed out with a massive headache, took Tylenol, and feeling dirty, took a shower, where I broke down, crying harder than I had since my mom died. I realized I had unleashed a firestorm that was now out of control. Nietzsche's saying about becoming a monster by fighting monsters felt apt. All I could do now was hang on and pray. I picked up Dean and Kathy, made chicken stir-fry, and waited for Jean. She didn't come home, and her phone was off. We ate and played a board game. Jean finally came home around 10, looking devastated. "You heard?" She sighed. "Have you heard all the nasty things they say about Tony?" She collapsed into a chair. I handed her a brandy. "Yeah, sounds like your boss is a carnivore," I said evenly. "Where there's smoke, there's fire." "No, Adam, he's a good man. He would never do anything like this." Time to get to phase 2. "Jean," she looked up, "you don't know the man very well." "You don't know me," I pressed on. "You and I have no secrets. We're husband and wife, so you know what I'm capable of, just like I know you." I held her gaze. "You may know Miller as your boss, but who knows what he's really like?" Conflicting thoughts played across her face. "No, he's a good man. He would never do that. I would know." "How do you know, Jean? He's your boss, your co-worker. He could be hiding a million secrets. I always felt like he was hiding something. He's the kind of guy you wouldn't leave alone with your wife or daughters." She sighed and hesitated. "Has he ever tried anything with you?" She turned white, and I pretended not to notice. "No, never. How can you even ask that?" She tried to be snarky but ended up looking dumbfounded. "Because you're a pretty woman, Jean. If what they say about him is true, he must be very immoral." She burst into tears, staring into her glass of brandy for answers she didn't find. She finished it and went upstairs, tiredly saying goodnight to Dean and Kathy. I heard the shower running. I finished my cognac and headed to bed, pretending to be half asleep when she returned. She was talking to someone, probably Evelyn, mentioning nightmares several times. She questioned why there weren't more women speaking out, and acknowledged it wouldn't go away easily. She was right. She made a second call. "Hi, Tony," she said. I overheard snippets where she reassured him it was all a misunderstanding and would be resolved. I barely heard her move to the kitchen, but I caught her last words, "I love you too." I heard the microwave beep, and she probably snacked alone before bed. By the time she joined me, I was asleep. Saturday, I woke up first, made breakfast, and drove Dean and Kathy to sports practice. At home, I spoke to Vicky, who told me 4 women had come forward. Her sources said the mayor's office considered the project toxic and was distancing itself, as were civic associations. By mid-morning, the Attorney General announced a full investigation, I talked to George about business and my father about my marriage. He agreed it was irretrievably broken, but said Dean and Kathy would cope like many kids in the U.S. I called Jean. Where are you? Evelyn, the company lawyers, and I are fighting these lawsuits. Are you sure you should be involved? I asked with concern. The fallout could be significant. She resisted as expected. That weekend, M had less than 20% of its usual attendance at the show. By Monday, the phones were ringing with canceled orders, and the New Horizon opening was postponed. Monday, another woman came forward. She was married to a wealthy businessman and well known in the community. She claimed Miller misused her twice during her 8-day stay at the house. She left her lawyers details for a class action lawsuit. By the end of the week, 5 things had happened. First, Miller was interviewed by the district attorney at the hospital, after which his condition worsened. Second, 3 of the 5 women testified to the police about assaults occurring about 5 years ago. Third, the media storm forced M to close its doors. Fourth, California stock passed $24, and I began selling shares, making back our original investment while retaining 2/3 of the stock. Fifth, my dad took Dean and Kathy out for the weekend. I bought a bottle of 2012 vintage Veuve Clicquot to celebrate with Jean. When I arrived home, I saw an M-branded BMW X5 parked next to Jean's Lexus. Inside, Jean was crying, and Evelyn was comforting her. Ladies, I greeted them, grabbed 3 champagne flutes and popped the cork. I filled the glasses and handed them out. They stared at me in shock. Salute, I toasted, drank half and burped. Then the shouting began. Jean, you're divorcing me. I thought we were a family. Divorce papers lay open on the coffee table. Evelyn, how could you, Adam? Don't you care about your wife? Don't you love her? Have a drink, Jean, celebrating the end of an era. I finished my champagne and reached for the bottle. Evelyn, first of all, I could, and I did. Second, I stopped caring and loving her when she became your father's strumpet. I knocked over my glass and toasted Evelyn. Let's drink to your father's legacy. I hope he lives long enough to stand trial so the world knows what a piece of crap he really is. She turned white and collapsed. I turned to Jean. Get yourself a lawyer. The kids will stay with my father until custody is established. Her eyes widened with fear, seeing a side of me she never had before. Evelyn dropped her flute, spilling champagne. They looked at me like I was a madman with a trigger. Care for champagne? I asked. No, you left me alone so long I needed human contact, Jean tried to justify but couldn't meet my gaze. I understand, I laughed humorlessly. And how do you manage that now? Evelyn attacked me again. How many women did you sleep with while you were away? Men always want their women to be angels while they do whatever they want. Don't think all men act like your father. Just because he ruined young women and marriages doesn't mean the rest of us stoop to his level. I stared at her, hoping she'd object. I leaned closer. Your father is a malfeasant, a criminal, a pig. He'll likely die before going to prison, but his reputation will be destroyed. His legacy project will never succeed. His money will be tied up in lawsuits. M will go bankrupt, and you'll have to change your name and move far away. She trembled and cried. I wished she was a man so I could unleash my rage. Evelyn, you probably helped lure these girls, like Ghislaine Maxwell did for Jeffrey Epstein. Her mouth opened in horror. No, it's all a lie. My father is a good man. I turned to Jean. You have 2 hours to pack and leave. If you're still here when I return, I'll call the press and invite them to interview you about your involvement. Screw you, she spat. I'll move out, but I'll hire a lawyer first thing, and then we'll see who gets what. 2 hours, I repeated. I drove off, but a few blocks away, the adrenaline caught up with me, and I had to pull over, gasping and shaking. After 15 minutes, I regained control and called my father. I told him about Jean's departure and asked him to keep Dean and Kathy with him. Jean could visit, but not be alone with them. We talked, and then I drove around aimlessly before getting gas and heading home. It was 10 by the time I returned. The house felt like a mausoleum, filled with the ghosts of happier times. The silence was deafening, and I couldn't sleep. Socrates said that an unexamined life isn't worth living, but I avoided examining my psyche too deeply. I knew things had gone too far and couldn't be stopped. I feared what might happen if the situation went to court and decided to get Leah out of town to eliminate my direct connection. The next morning, I felt as tired as when I went to bed. After my morning routine, I had breakfast downtown and called the kids. They were fine, though Dean suspected something was wrong. Over coffee, I reached Leah. Did I deliver as promised? She asked. I confirmed she had. We arranged her flight to Chicago the next day. I had transferred $25,000 from my offshore account to one of George's, then to her new bank account. Leah was off to a job as a property management assistant set up by one of George's contacts. I was on my second cup of coffee when Vicky called. 3 women have sued Miller seeking damages. The papers will be served on Monday. We talked for a while. She and the news editors were surprised by the timing and the way the story had unfolded, but given the current climate, it wasn't shocking. Once Leah, who claimed she was a courtesan, got publicity, others followed, similar to the Harvey Weinstein case. I spent the rest of Saturday with Dean and Kathy. I told them their mom and I were divorcing because she was having an affair with her boss, Anthony Miller. Kathy didn't understand, but Dean did. She slept with Mr. Miller, Dad? I nodded sadly. Yeah, they've been together for a while now. Kathy cried while Dean remained unfazed. We went to the golf course with my dad and hit a few buckets of balls. Dean and Kathy used my old clubs and had a good natural swing. We had dinner at a Greek restaurant and then headed to bed. I returned to my quiet, lonely house and had another sleepless night. On Sunday, her parents called, hoping for reconciliation for the sake of the children. How can I reconcile with a woman who's been having an affair for years, I asked, especially with a maniac like Miller? They sighed, and I assured them it would be figured out in court. They were left with a shattered view of their daughter. Life went on slowly and painfully. Dean and Kathy moved back in with me, and my father moved in to help. My business gained momentum as George and I received positive feedback. Vicky informed me that a 4th woman had joined the lawsuit against Miller, but not Leah, which I found odd. I had a meeting with Jean's lawyers about property division. I'd set up investment accounts for Dean and Kathy's education out of our combined assets, so they couldn't be touched. My last paycheck and payments from JP Morgan went to my offshore account. Her lawyer suspected a golden handshake but had no idea how much. It was only a matter of time before they subpoenaed the HR documents. I offered Jean nothing, as she had a good job. She argued there should be at least $250,000 in cash and near-cash assets. I assured them it was lost on unprofitable stocks. Jean called it crap, but I laughed. Take the deal, Jean, or I'll fight until you run out of money for lawyers. I'll expletive you financially. Why are you being such an idiot, she asked. I deserve half of whatever is left of our marriage. Go to your second husband and ask him for money. You had more of a marriage with him than with me. But hurry, he may not have any money left after those women get what they deserve. It dragged on for months. Jean's stance wavered from meeting to meeting. She claimed I made her relationship with Miller look more serious than it was, then blamed me for her behavior, then wanted to reconcile, and finally threatened to take me to the cleaners. Her lawyer said he'd get her back in the house immediately. I gave her my biggest grin. Be careful, Jean, or I'll expose your complicity in this. She turned pale. Try it and see what happens next. As I left the lawyer's office, I noticed Evelyn glaring at me. I smiled at her like one smiles at the walking dead. Her smile faltered. You should have stayed out of this, Evelyn. You reap what you sow. 2 days later, Leah was $5,000 richer, and the local newspapers, Twitter, and social media were ablaze with revelations about Evelyn Miller helping her disgraced father, Anthony Miller. The DA's office faced criticism for not arresting Miller or taking action against his daughter. In a media briefing, the DA's office said the investigation was still in its early stages, but the press didn't hold back. And another storm erupted. The public, still reeling from the Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein scandal, quickly targeted Evelyn. Miller was sued by 4 women, making me increasingly anxious and sleepless. Going to court was a huge risk and could derail everything. 6 weeks after my return from Singapore, the doorbell rang. It was Evelyn. What do you need? I asked bluntly. Can we talk, Adam? No, I don't want to be associated with a malfeasant like you. I closed the door, but she rang again, begging to talk. Where's your entitlement now? I thought, but said, I don't think so. You just want to record me. Or I promise I won't. Good. Her eyes lit up, but I stopped her. Put your purse and phone in the car first. I set my phone to record. Okay, talk. She looked unsure whether to stand or sit, but eventually sat on the edge of the couch. I know it's you, Adam. You created this nightmare. I stared at her without emotion. Stop it, Adam. I remained silent, and she changed the subject. Your claims about my father are lies. They need to be disproved. I laughed. There's nothing I can do. It's up to the court now. Please, Adam, I know you can stop this. Now that your world has collapsed, you want my help. Where were you when your father was with my wife? Her face reddened. Oh yes, you were helping, making sure she agreed to be your father's strumpet. We stared in silence. Finally, she asked, when will you be satisfied? Not until your family is completely destroyed, Evelyn. She shuddered. There will be no stopping, no ceasefire, no peace. I spoke slowly, making sure she understood this wasn't a game. She realized the truth and fell silent, then surprised me by asking, "You want revenge on me? How?" She clasped her hands together, unable to meet my eyes. Staggering, she left and ran to her BMW. I watched her drive away, feeling both satisfaction and disgust at my cruelty. Though it was early, I wanted a drink. I spent the rest of the week in and out of law offices while working on new clients. George and I were completing due diligence on promising listings on the Hong Kong and Johannesburg stock exchanges. The 4 women's class action lawsuit against Miller was in full swing. The Millers, led by Evelyn and her attorneys, were trying to settle out of court. The DA struggled with prosecuting a man on his deathbed, so we waited. The Millers had been nearly cleaned out, and the women received over $2 million each. This effectively marked the end of M. I needed one more thing to complete my revenge. So I went to the hospital and entered Miller's room, looking official and walking as if I belonged there. No one stopped me. I wanted him to know who had ruined him and his legacy. He lived for 2 more days. Evelyn had him cremated, and only 5 people attended the small gathering, including Jean. She wanted to take Dean and Kathy with her. I told her, "I would see you dead first." "You would, wouldn't you?" she replied with a mix of fear and hatred, similar to Evelyn's last look. "You ruined him, didn't you? All because he and I had a relationship. You went crazy and ruined so many lives." She cried. I laughed harshly. "You planted the seeds, Jean. Why didn't you just tell me you wanted someone else? We could have divorced, but you chose to neglect me." She admitted quietly, "I loved Tony. He gave me what I needed. With you, I felt like your job came first. Then when we had Dean and Kathy, I felt even more neglected. I could have walked away, but I didn't. I played a recording on my phone. Was it worth it?" I asked. "No," Miller wheezed. "You ruined everything I worked for. It's your own fault, Miller. I screwed you up big time." "How did you find out about me misusing them?" he asked. I started laughing uncontrollably. "I didn't know, Miller. I thought I was making it up, but now I see why those women pursued you. It all burst open with one little crack." "Screw you, Carter," he panted. "Those women owed me." He tried to sit up. Jean collapsed to the floor in shock. I walked away, leaving her behind. When MRE sold assets to free up cash, I bought the house they were converting into New Horizon House for next to nothing. I announced I would turn it into a full-fledged shelter for misused women, renamed it Joy Carter House after my mother, and placed it in trust with my dad and the 4 women who sued Miller as trustees. They contributed to the project, and the media praised us. During the divorce, Jean got primary custody, and I paid alimony until Dean and Kathy turned 18. She could stay in the house, but had to contribute 50% toward the mortgage. Alimony for her was 0. When she accused me of hiding money, I threatened her, and she backed down. She became very cautious around me. We eventually divorced. I bought a 3-bedroom condo so the kids could stay with me. I had them almost every weekend since Jean was busy selling houses. I missed them when I traveled regularly to the Far East, but overall, life wasn't too bad. I laughed at myself. Things were tough, but manageable. Jean's relationship with Evelyn ended immediately after I showed her the tape of my confrontation with Miller. I also circulated an edited version of the tape with her father's confession. This took on a life of its own. Evelyn left a couple of months later, and I never heard from her again. I met Leah in Chicago, whose real name was Leanne Roxton. She had cleaned up and was enjoying her work. "Did you know?" I asked. "It was like an open secret," she said. "No one admitted to the misuse directly. Everyone was afraid being kicked out on the street would be worse." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She laughed. "I had no idea. I wasn't misused. I contacted a few women, offered them $5,000 to say they were misused." She glared at me, daring me to object, but I didn't. Rita French, the second woman I contacted, fell apart on the phone. She was the first to call the radio station when Miller's daughter was on air. The Me Too campaign started organically from there. "You could have made so much money," I sympathized. She shook her head. "By the time they sued Miller, I was in Chicago and out of the loop. But you gave me a good start, Adam. Thank you." My revenge was complete, and my actions felt justified. The Millers were destroyed. Like in a fictional saga, I learned lessons in revenge and executed them in ways I never imagined. Financially, things were improving. The business was growing, and George talked about me buying him out for his retirement. Dean and Kathy adjusted well, focusing on school, friends, and sports. Life went on. About 4 years after the divorce, Jean began dating an older man. They eventually married. Dean and Kathy said he was a nice guy. I remained single and wasn't seriously dating anyone, likely due to lingering trust issues. At my father's insistence, I started seeing a trauma counselor and began improving my life, but I still had a long way to go.
I'm 43, and my wife, aged 40, and I've been married for 16 years. We have a 14-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. Our marriage had a challenging start, but we got through those tough years and emerged stronger. We married young, lacking some maturity, but our love helped us conquer any challenges. I'm not entirely sure if this was wishful thinking. My wife has been a manager at a large advertising company for 3 years, and I've been an engineer for 7 years. Both our jobs pay well, providing a comfortable lifestyle for our family. We are a close-knit family, always making time for our kids to create cherished memories. Despite being a good dad and husband, I was shocked to discover my wife's long-term affair, despite some mistakes I made. Now, on to the discovery. My wife became distant, especially in the last 2 challenging years. She constantly compared me to her boss, who seemed to handle things better. I couldn't read her mind, unlike her boss. I didn't take the initiative to plan dates and make her feel special, something her boss did for his wife. I asked her what she wanted to spice up our love life, but her response was vague. I needed to already know and do it. Feeling clueless, I researched and bought books, but my attempts were met with disappointment. Unbeknownst to me, it wasn't me who was fixing things all along. We were close to her boss and his family, spending time together at barbecues, family outings, and other activities. I confided in her boss about our marital problems, thinking he was a good person. Back to the discovery, I grew emotionally tired from my wife's demands to improve our marriage. One night, she laughed and giggled while texting someone, and when I tried to peek, she angrily pulled away. Suspecting an affair, I made the mistake of asking her directly the next day, but she vehemently denied any wrongdoing. Unable to access her phone initially, I later obtained it and discovered deleted texts. Although some conversations seemed inconsistent, I gathered bits and pieces of proof, confirming the affair with her boss. Instead of confronting her immediately, I waited, feeling devastated and concerned about the kids. Despite the pain, I didn't want to give up on the marriage. So, 3 days later, I purchased How to Help Your Spouse Heal from an Affair with the hope of saving our relationship. Planning to talk on a Saturday, she claimed an emergency at work, which seemed suspicious. Unable to confirm, she returned home late on Sunday, avoiding questions about her delay. I suffered, but she seemed indifferent. Desperate for stability, I contacted her boss's wife, who was as shocked as me. We decided to gather evidence on each side and compare. I snooped on my wife, and she did the same with her husband, easily finding undeniable proof. Her husband's arrogance left the texts on his phone intact, making sense of the little texts I found earlier. We discovered the affair had been ongoing for 2 years, and both of us were furious. Although revenge was tempting, we decided against it. They had slept together in various places, even exchanging pictures. Ignoring the images to avoid scarring ourselves, we sought revenge without engaging in our own affairs. We both drew up divorce papers around the same time, determined to move on from the betrayal. Our spouses were unaware that we knew, so we played our roles. When everything was set, they resumed their affair. This time, we collaborated with the boss's wife, knowing exactly where and how to confront them, even the hotel they booked for their weekend getaway. I personally went there with the sheriff, waiting in the lobby while my wife was called down from a room, dressed in a bathrobe. Despite the distance from our home, it wasn't too far. The sheriff asked for her confirmation, and she was served after confusedly affirming her name. It was satisfying to see the shock on her face, but I walked away without rubbing it in. She grabbed my arm, demanding to know the meaning. I told her about the affair and I'm leaving. Simple. She screamed, pulled my arm, and the sheriff had to intervene, telling her to release me. She started crying, but I left quickly to get home. My wife informed her boss, and he panicked, being served at home. We didn't give them time to recover. We blindsided them, just like they did to us. My divorce will be finalized in a couple of months, while hers might take a bit longer. Both my wife and her boss are fighting the divorces, neither wanting to end their marriages. The excuses I hear are that they never intended to leave their spouses. It was a purely clean affair, nothing more. People have worse affairs and still come out with a great marriage. They messed up and would like a chance to fix the situation. I asked my wife about the outcome, and she said she was going with the flow, acting completely out of character. I called her an idiot. People around me criticize me for not giving my wife another chance. My kids know what's going on, age appropriate, and they support me, but wish we could stay together. My resolve is slipping, especially since we still live in the same house, and my wife is going to therapy and reading the book I brought. She says she's remorseful and will do whatever it takes. All I tell her is that she's sorry she got caught, and that's all I need to know. She called me a bitter, resentful person who can't look past all the negativity. She apologized later, but I know that's how she feels. The boss's wife and I still talk, which my wife hates. She thinks I might have a revenge affair, or her boss's wife is the reason I won't give us another chance. She has asked me repeatedly to initiate no contact with her boss's wife, just like she did with her boss. I told her she's crazy, we didn't do anything wrong, and why should I respect her opinions now? See, I think I'm done. I have no respect for her. She still doesn't want to give up, and is actively trying to engage with me about her thoughts and processes to her affair. I see them as excuses, so I don't entertain her. She wants me to do therapy with her. I've read many places where the therapist blames the sufferer, so I said hell no. She wants me to read infidelity books with her. What's the point if we're going to divorce anyway? She wants to be with me. I told her she's not going to manipulate me with closeness. She says it's not manipulation, just showing how much she loves me. I corrected and said love me now. People around me, even my mom, are frustrated, saying people make mistakes, and my wife realizes through her mistakes that she truly does love me. I tell them I won't be anyone's fallback plan. I feel bad for treating her the way I do, but I still love her even though there's hate. Am I being unnecessarily cruel to her? She's trying hard, but I just don't care. Should I reconsider the divorce? People are saying I'm moving too quickly and might regret it. Is that true? I don't know what's real. Update. Thanks for your concern, guys. My wife and I are in a sort of good place, but we're not reconciling. I'm still divorcing her because her affair was too long for me to get over. If it had been a one-night stand, that would be a different story. But no, 2 years is just a slap in the face. I've gone to a few therapy sessions with her because I'm not a monster and still love her. One session was very good and made me understand her remorse. She hasn't handled the fallout perfectly, but she's been trying pretty damn hard. The second session was a mess of her being upset with me for continuously contacting the boss's wife and her being afraid of a revenge affair. It was the angriest I ever was through this whole mess, and we argued a great deal later because I refused to do what she wanted, which is no contact with the boss's wife. That was resolved when I promised her that there will be no revenge affair. I know I don't owe her anything, but she's still my wife until our divorce, and I still want to hold true to my commitments. I've attended more sessions with her to check on her progress. Yes, this therapist handles both individual and marriage counseling. No, I'm not attending these sessions because I secretly want to save our marriage. I just want to witness my wife's progress and be involved if needed. After the divorce, I'll step away gracefully. The boss's wife is still leaving her husband, and he's still resisting the divorce. She's as determined as I am, and I'll admit we confide in each other during low days. I still don't see any affair. We're just on friendly terms. She's a strong, independent woman who doesn't tolerate nonsense. My kids are doing well. They understand that divorcing doesn't mean we love them any less. They don't want a divorce, but they understand why it's necessary for us in an age-appropriate way. My wife no longer works at the advertising company. She resigned after I served her. She's strictly no contact with her former boss. According to her, she sought help on forums to save the marriage. I've been reading a lot here, and initially, I didn't get why people stayed with adulterers, but after seeing my wife work hard to be a better person, I can see the temptation. She's not a monster, she's just flawed and made horrible choices, learning to be better. She's offered everything for another chance, but I'm not sure. As the divorce nears, I feel more at peace. We recently discussed her asking for a chance after the divorce. She's offered a postnup. I wasn't completely opposed, but it would be a very, very long road for her. To be honest, a huge part of me wants this divorce for a fleeting sense of justice, the only justice I can get without becoming an adulterer. My mom and I reconciled after I revealed more about my wife's affair, but now she's furious after learning the details. Navigating her anger is challenging. Regarding a revenge affair, I didn't want to write here until my divorce was finalized, but I'm just angry today and need to vent. As many of you know, my wife is scared crazy about a revenge affair. The simple reason is because I'm still in contact and see the other woman she betrayed. My wife is very insecure compared to the other betrayed spouse. Is that how it's spelled? The other betrayed spouse is younger, a model, very attractive, and owns a successful business. It makes my wife paranoid that I will give in to temptation and cheat on her as revenge. I still can't believe the nerve of her to give me the two wrongs don't make a right speech. Of course, she isn't wrong, and I don't intend to ever follow through, but her hypocrisy infuriates me. Every time I visit the other betrayed spouse, my wife gets extremely sad or clingy. I don't know how many times she has thrown herself at me just to make sure I don't cheat on her back. I reject her attempts, and it only makes things worse. It absolutely floors me that cheaters are this selfish, only thinking about themselves and their pain, while the betrayed have to trudge along and try to pick up the pieces. Another thing, our kids still see their kids. I never go to the other betrayed spouse without my kids. But no, my wife still thinks I have it in me to be as heartless as she was and take any opportunity to be with another woman. Laughable. Ohm is still living in their holiday home, begging the other betrayed spouse to take him back. I won't lie, it brings me a sense of great satisfaction to see him suffer the consequences. He hasn't tried to threaten me because of how much leverage I have on him. He is allowed to visit his kids anytime he wants, but doesn't want to see me, so he makes sure I'm not around and then visits. I pity the guy, honestly. Currently, my wife has been extremely apologetic. She's been showing me a lot of affection, but I've been ignoring it because I'm not in a good place. We have a therapy session today, and I plan to express all the pain and hurt I've endured because of her. The rage I feel is becoming overwhelming. Update. During a recent therapy session with my wife, she asked for more time to win me back. She had several reasons why I should at least try to participate in recovering our marriage, not necessarily reconciling. I kept pointing out that she's only trying now because of the fallout from her affair. If she was still with the other person, she wouldn't be making an effort. She emotionally mistreated me for months, and I won't let myself be walked all over, even by the woman I loved. She acknowledged her wrongdoings and apologized again, making many promises to make it up to me. She wants our marriage to become stronger than ever and believes it's possible. I asked if she was willing to deal with my rage because I have a lot of it. She said absolutely, encouraging me to unload on her whenever I needed to process the pain. Usually, when I ask her why she had an affair, I get a million excuses. This time, she was straightforward, admitting there was no excuse for what she did. She vowed to show through her actions every day for the rest of her life that she's truly remorseful and would never hurt me that way again. She opened up about her feelings, revealing she was very insecure and jealous of the other betrayed spouse. The affair boosted her ego, making her feel beautiful and desired. She admitted it was a fantasy that would never last, regretting it deeply. She acknowledged the guilt she'd carry for the rest of her life and said she'd probably never forgive herself. She confessed she could never compare to the other betrayed spouse, and her certainty that I would cheat back stemmed from the other person's beauty and integrity. The other betrayed spouse never said a mean thing or threatened her. It was all my wife's insecurities talking. The therapist asked what it would take for me to consider my wife's proposal. I couldn't think of anything and honestly said I needed a time machine because what I have now is a sham of a marriage. I never signed up for this. The therapist suggested that all marriages face problems and how they're dealt with shows the strength of a marriage. I was taken aback and told the therapist to focus on my wife, not us. The therapist suggested my unwillingness to listen to logical reasoning might be a communication problem. I didn't disagree. On the drive home, my wife and I had a long talk. She asked if I felt emasculated due to her affair, surprising me with the question. I answered yes. She then shocked me by asking if I would feel better if I slept with another woman. I reiterated that I'm not normal and wouldn't have a revenge affair. She clarified she meant a trial separation where I could go out and regain my confidence. She'd remain faithful and wait for me to come back when I'm ready. I thought her proposal was crazy, asking how it would benefit the marriage for both of us to have affairs. She argued that mine wouldn't be an affair because we'd be separated with conditions allowing me to see other people. I rejected the idea, finding it out of character for her to propose that. Despite not trusting her, she has been surprisingly calm and patient these few weeks, almost like a different person from the insecure one. Even though she doesn't want it, She has been generous in the divorce, making the situation difficult to navigate. Update. Before I dive into it, I want to thank those who've been supporting me. Right now, my wife and I decided to be civil and spend the holidays together for our kids. This will be our last holiday, though my wife hopes otherwise. I'm doing it for our kids because I love them. Our divorce will be final in mid-February. For those curious, we've split everything 50-50. Though my wife has been generous, I'm unsure if it's a tactic for later nastiness. So far, she's been nice, confessing it's because I've been a great husband and father, so I should get a fair divorce. She won't lose much in the divorce, but I'll get slightly more, thanks to her. I stopped therapy with her. It gave false hope. She admits a desire for closeness due to my absence, understanding I felt emasculated due to her affair. She's been frequently trying to engage me in closeness, which is new since my wife hardly initiated closeness before. Over time, I appreciated her addressing my hang-up, but I reject her attempts. She insists it's not about reconciliation. She just wants me to feel good and desired. I've cut off contact with the other betrayed spouse temporarily due to things getting too personal. The other betrayed spouse confessed interest, willing to wait until my divorce is finalized before anything. I'm confused and unsure about returning her feelings, so we decided to take a break until everything is sorted out. Despite someone suggesting my presence affects her reconciliation, I have nothing to do with her decision to leave Ohm. She's done with him, and we don't talk badly about our spouses when together. Ohm recently apologized in person, but I didn't accept it. Call me petty, but I don't care about what he's going through. I have a question. Is it okay to have closeness with my wife, even if we're not reconciling? I miss the closeness, and my wife is eager, trying everything possible to initiate it. Sometimes I find it hard to resist. She even got rid of anything related to Ohm without me asking, as I didn't care to know where they had closeness. It's not easy for me to switch off these feelings. Is this a trap? Am I being played? Before someone suggests kicking her out, I've tried that, but I want her here for less hassle until the divorce is done. Rant. It's finally dawned on me. I thought I wasted years on a seemingly worthless woman, but she gave me great kids and memories. I won't forget that, but I now understand I can do better than her. I've received advice and finally understand I deserve better. She treated me poorly when another man showed her attention, investing her energy in him. Only now, when I'm over her, does she try everything to keep me and invest in us. Now she wants me to be happy, even being adventurous in bed. While our previous closeness wasn't perfect, I liked it. I realize I've missed out on a lot through her texts with Ohm, knowing just the tip of the iceberg and how graphic their encounters were. Now she values my boundaries, sees me as the king she should have before, but it feels fleeting. She's transparent and brutally honest, expressing regret for the affair. I see her constant look of shame and hopelessness when I'm unreceptive, making me hate myself sometimes, but it's necessary. Why can't I see this as a positive thing? Why can't I judge her for her remorseful actions? Many people have long-term affairs and come out stronger, right? Why am I basing decisions on emotion and not mature objectivity? Someone else might get the improved version of her while I navigate another uncertain relationship. Why not fight for this when everything seems to point to something good in the future? I've been given these lines and have one answer. I won't accept disrespect. Maybe I was willing to in the early stages, but I woke up from that quickly. This is for the people who pumped me and regularly asked about my situation. I'm going to enjoy this Christmas with my entire family and then move on from my wife. I decided to stop listening to the nonsense I created in my head to keep my wife's control over me and move on entirely from the idea of her. I won't be dating her or giving us another chance. We are over for good. I like to say my wife isn't a villain, and that's true. I want her to be happy, but it will never be with me. She has shown me that. I called the other betrayed spouse today and offered her dinner after the holidays for her support when I hit rock bottom. She said she would love to. I know this doesn't happen often, but we really supported each other throughout all of this, and I owe her thanks. Before people start talking about how much I planned this with the other betrayed spouse, I honestly did not. My emotions have been so screwed up these few years that the very thought of another woman never crossed my mind, and it's dinner, nothing else, unless we both want it. But the closer divorce gets, the more I realize I actually have options. And one option has been right there. What about Ohm? I don't give a flying FK about the dude. I do not think I will marry again, and I will tell this to any woman. Although my divorce hasn't been much of a hassle, I am losing a lot of money. Still, the whole idea of marriage just seems like a sham to me now. Sorry for being so cynical right now. I don't want this post to offend anyone, but I'm still jaded. I gave my best years to this woman, and I'm starting to realize how little I got back. Update. Officially divorced. It's been a long time coming. It's over. My ex and I have officially separated for good. It happened almost 3 weeks ago, and for a few days after, I grieved like I lost a loved one. It hit me extremely hard that my marriage failed so spectacularly. I never cried that hard, ever since I discovered the affair in the first place. I raged a lot too, definitely one of my lowest points. Everything has been organized for my ex, partially for the kids' sake. She moved out of the house and I'm looking to buy her out of her part of it. She lives in an apartment now, a big downgrade for her which depresses her. She is still going to therapy, still invested in reading and studying infidelity. I don't know exactly why. We've had long talks leading to and after the divorce, minimal physical contact. I know I shouldn't entertain her now, but she's still the mother of my kids, and I want us to be good co-parents. I'm nothing if not logical about the situation, largely thanks to this community and others. Of course, it's the same tune. She wants to reconcile, and I think it's too risky for me to put myself in that situation again. Unfortunately, I'm not in the mood to give her that gift. This past weekend, I accompanied the other betrayed spouse to dinner with no intention other than enjoying each other's company and chatting. We talked about all sorts of things. Things got flirty between us, and I must admit, I was very reluctant to entertain the rapidly changing mood. Well, I guess I should say the night ended in a very passionate way. Sorry for TMI. It was probably the most perfect closeness I've ever had. OBS is very much a giver and spades above my ex. I did not intend for it to go that far, but the other betrayed spouse and I were willing, and I was as well. I learned quite a few more tricks in the sack. It's the first time I ever had someone that enthusiastic to please me, and not the other way around. Guess I shouldn't call her the other betrayed spouse anymore, as she divorced her ex. But for privacy's sake, I'll just use that. I do not think we will take our relationship further. To be honest, I think the hormones and wine got the best of us that night. She would like to, but I am undecided. I need to sort myself out emotionally, and I think she does as well. I feel very good, though. People might not like hearing this, but the closeness I had with the other betrayed spouse really helped a lot with my residual self-esteem issues. I felt desired, alive, and finally understood what I was missing out on. I will never settle for robotic closeness again. What was more satisfying was knowing that I was not cheating and did not lower my morals. All things considered, I'm very proud of how I handled all this crap. I wasn't perfect, but did the best I could. I'm probably coming out very lucky compared to many BHS, even if I did lose a substantial amount of money in this process. But it was because I was willing to absorb advice and listen to people with experience instead of going in blind and hoping for the best. Takeaways. Respect yourself. Never tolerate disrespect, even from those closest to you. Everyone deserves a healthy and fulfilling relationship. Don't settle for less from your partner. A committed relationship should have a satisfying closeness life. If your partner isn't putting in effort, especially if they did so before or during an affair, don't accept it. Express your dissatisfaction. If your partner doesn't meet your needs, don't settle for unexciting closeness unless you both agree. It's okay to walk away. Communicate, communicate, communicate. It's incredibly important. If you're betrayed, only you can truly heal yourself. It took me a long time to grasp this. There are more points, but that's all I can think of now. I'll answer comments for a few hours, but after that, I'm done posting here and moving on with my life. Have a good one, everyone. Update. I intentionally avoided anything related to infidelity because I still get triggered now and then. I'm dealing with the trauma and trying to move on without dwelling too much on it. I'm okay. No accidents or disappearing acts. I'm still an IC other betrayed spouse with my girlfriend. She resolved her case with OM regarding child custody and finances maturely instead of seeking revenge. There's some tension among the children, and we've started therapy to help them adjust and understand that our relationship doesn't diminish their importance. It's challenging because not everyone is on board. My daughter X and OM don't like being around each other. and there's tension. My ex wants a second chance, probably upset that the other betrayed spouse is influencing my perspective. I'm genuinely concerned about her behavior. She tried something at a 4th of July party, and though I stopped it, she's persisting. People warned me she might pine for me, and they were right. The other betrayed spouse is letting me handle it, but is also growing weary of my ex. Did I mention my ex strongly dislikes the other betrayed spouse? I thought my ex was changing for the better, but since I left her, she's been a train wreck. It's puzzling. I treated her well and she treated me poorly. But the moment I said, "Forget you," she's desperate for my attention. I don't know if I should be angry about it. Well, there you have it. Y'all can rest easy now. I'm concerned about my daughter. Hello, everyone. I've been searching for helpful resources to navigate my current situation. Check my history for more details, but I'll provide a summary. My ex-wife had a 2-year affair, during which she was emotionally abusive and frequently compared me to her affair partner, Om. Our closeness suffered, and initially, I blamed myself. When I discovered the affair, I eventually decided to divorce her, especially after a weekend when she lied about spending time with Om. I connected with the other betrayed spouse, and together we initiated divorces while ensuring our children were informed in an age-appropriate manner. We've been open with the kids, explaining the separation without details. Despite their understandable reluctance, they handled it as well as could be expected. My ex-wife pushed for reconciliation, but I chose to end the relationship, forgiving her but moving forward. The divorce was financially costly, but not excessively damaging. Soon after the divorce, the other betrayed spouse and I developed a serious relationship, having initially been friends with benefits. Supporting each other post-affair fallout was crucial, and without it, I might have remained with my cheating ex or worse. I regularly talk to my kids, ensuring open communication. My son, aged 10, likes the other betrayed spouse, while my 15-year-old daughter is taking more time to adjust. She wants me to be happy, but is cautious about interfering in my relationship. We've discussed healthy relationships and her concerns, and she seems supportive, although she needs time. Our relationship is discreet to avoid overwhelming all the kids, including her 2 daughters. Everyone, including Om, is in therapy. Now, concerning my daughter, the fallout from the affair strained her relationship with her mother. She openly expresses hatred because she believes none of this would have happened if not for her mother's actions. She acts rebelliously toward her mother, rejecting affection and even cursing at her. I've stepped in to enforce respect, but it worries me. The ex-wife is trying to mend their relationship, seeking my assistance despite it being my decision to divorce. I could throw her infidelity in her face, but I choose not to. However, it raises doubts about how I handled the situation. Things I'm worried about. Daughter lacks respect for her mother. Daughter wishes for things to go back to before. She's unaware of her mother's misuse toward me. Daughter is in therapy, but I'm unsure of its effectiveness. Concerns that she feels voiceless and overwhelmed. Handling my relationship well, but possibly hiding emotions. Fear of having negatively impacted my kids' lives by divorcing their mother. Any advice is highly appreciated. Update. I want to share a realistic update, not a fairy tale. Let's address the big question. How are the other betrayed spouse and I doing? Honestly, we're doing fantastic. If I had known a woman like her existed earlier, I would have found her years ago. Jokes aside, our relationship is the strongest I've ever had. Because my ex-wife put me through so much, I didn't really know what a healthy relationship looked like. I still doubted myself, but the other betrayed spouse has been an amazing partner, helping me through this. I'm genuinely in love with her. She consistently shows me how much I mean to her, and I feel the same way. However, we're keeping it at the girlfriend level, and I'm still unsure about the whole idea of marriage. We're keeping our relationship private and involving the children as little as possible, although they know we're dating. Now, about the kids, it was a bit rough at first. Who am I kidding? But they're getting along really well now. Our heavy involvement in their lives and ensuring they had someone to talk to when they had problems helped. Also, there's been a lot of therapy. My daughter and son adore the other betrayed spouse. She has a great connection with kids, and her children like me much more than they did almost 2 years ago. Her youngest even started telling people that I'm her stepdad at functions and outings I took her to, which was a surprise. I was concerned she might feel pressured to see me that way. but she assured me she liked me a lot, and I make her mom happy, so she's happy. I'm her stepdad. Hearing that hit me emotionally, though I put up a strong front. I enjoy seeing my kids happily playing with the others, even though they've formed a united front to playfully tease my son, the only boy and the youngest of the bunch. I'm not sure if I should laugh or cringe at that one. So, how about my cheating ex-wife? We are on good terms. She's been working hard to repair her relationship with our daughter, and I was pleased when my daughter said she could find it in her heart to forgive her mother for what she did. They've been through a lot and have made progress together. Despite that, I don't think my ex-wife has fully accepted that we're done as a couple. She seems to be looking for or hinting at a second try. She's been hitting the gym and attending individual therapy. Overall, she seems much healthier now, but I don't really care. I've made peace with the past, and it's her problem for not doing the same. She talks more with the other betrayed spouse, and that's reciprocated. However, the other betrayed spouse regards her with skepticism, which is understandable given everything that's happened. Ohm is a lost cause. I didn't realize what a mess the guy would be despite all his money. He has a girlfriend now, but his kids despise her and are very open about it. It took me some time to see how full of himself the dude was. To be honest, I don't like his girlfriend either. She comes off as extremely materialistic, selfish, and callous toward the girls. In conclusion, we're doing better than okay. Don't get me wrong, I had doubts about whether this was the right path, but with a lot of effort from everyone involved, it's turning out splendidly. No happily ever after, just genuinely happy now.
The golden light of the late afternoon poured into the streets of Vienna, casting a soft amber glow across the cobbled roads. Lucas Miller, a 38-year-old financial analyst, sat at his sleek mahogany desk, absent-mindedly tapping his fingers against the surface. His home office was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floor beneath him. The room was a testament to the life he had built. Framed degrees from prestigious universities, photos of vacations with his wife, Elena, and the scent of fresh coffee brewing in the corner. Vienna had always been his sanctuary, a place where art, history, and modernity converged in a symphony of beauty. He and Elena had made their life here, a comfortable one, full of laughter, travel, and mutual dreams. She was an art curator, her 36-year-old self constantly moving between cities for exhibitions and gallery openings. Their marriage, now 8 years strong, had always felt stable. They had weathered the storms of early careers, infertility struggles, and the quiet battles of long-term relationships. Or so he thought. For months now, an unsettling feeling had gnawed at the back of his mind. Elena, once full of animated stories about her work and the artists she admired, had become distant. Her phone had become a permanent fixture in her hand, her gaze often slipping to it mid-conversation. Lucas tried not to read too much into it. He reminded himself that they were both busy. They were getting older, and the honeymoon phase couldn't last forever, right? Still, there were signs. She had grown secretive about her trips, casual mentions of just another gallery in Paris, or a quick visit to Berlin, seemed more frequent than usual. Lucas noticed the subtle shifts, the slightly hurried goodbyes before work trips, the lack of intimacy when she returned. It was unlike Elena to be emotionally distant. They had always been open with each other, talking through whatever struggles or stresses they faced. But now something was different. It was a quiet Friday evening when Lucas finally saw what had been hidden from him all these months. As he went through his emails, deleting spam, and reviewing some work-related documents, a message appeared in his inbox. The subject line read, "For your eyes only." Lucas felt a strange tension settle over him as he opened the email. It contained no text, just a few attachments, photos. His breath hitched in his throat as he clicked on the first one. It was Elena, his wife, smiling coyly in a hotel room. A room he knew all too well. It was the same boutique hotel they had stayed in during their honeymoon in Paris. The plush, cream-colored duvet, the abstract painting above the headboard. It was unmistakable, but what shook him to his core was the man beside her. He was young, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair and a chiseled jawline. In the next picture, Elena was kissing him. The man's hands were wrapped around her waist, pulling her closer as they lay on the bed. Lucas stared at the images in disbelief. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the rest of the pictures, each one more damning than the last. Elena, the woman he had loved, trusted, and built his life with, was in bed with another man. And this wasn't some fleeting moment of indiscretion. The way they looked at each other, the intimacy in their touches, it spoke of a deeper connection, a secret life that Elena had kept from him. He sat there for what felt like hours, his heart pounding in his chest. His world was crumbling around him, and yet everything remained painfully still. How could she do this? Why hadn't he seen it coming? The clock on the wall ticked louder with every passing second, echoing the emptiness he felt inside. Lucas's mind raced with questions, each more painful than the last. How long had this been going on? Was it just one affair, or had there been others? And most importantly, what was he supposed to do now? Elena came home that night, oblivious to the storm waiting for her. The sound of the front door clicking shut echoed through their large apartment. Lucas remained in his office, his eyes fixed on the photos. He heard her footsteps, the soft hum of her voice, as she greeted him from the hallway. "Lucas, are you still working?" Elena called, her voice cheerful. He didn't respond immediately. His throat was dry, and his heart felt as if it had been ripped from his chest. How could she sound so normal, so unburdened by the betrayal she had been living? Moments later, Elena appeared in the doorway. Her smile faltered as she noticed the stern expression on Lucas's face. His hand clutched his phone, still displaying the email. "Lucas, is everything okay?" she asked, a hint of concern creeping into her voice. Without a word, Lucas handed her his phone. Elena's face went pale as she stared at the screen. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, he saw real fear in them. "Elena," Lucas's voice was strained, barely above a whisper. "What is this?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head, her lips quivering. "Lucas, I can explain," she stammered, her voice cracking. "Explain?" Lucas's voice rose, filled with anguish and disbelief. "How do you explain this?" He gestured toward the photos. "How long, Elena? How long have you been lying to me?" Elena's tears spilled over, and she covered her face with her hands, unable to meet his gaze. "It was a mistake," she sobbed. "I never meant for it to happen. Damien, it just happened. I didn't." "Damien." Lucas spat the name out like venom. "Is that his name? How long, Elena?" 6 months, she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's been going on for 6 months." Lucas felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room. 6 months. Half a year of lies, deceit, and betrayal. He had spent that time believing they were still building a future together, while she had been living a double life. "Why?" he asked, his voice broken. "Was I not enough for you?" Elena shook her head, her sobs coming harder now. "No, it's not like that. It wasn't about you, Lucas. I was lost, confused. I didn't know how to handle everything. Work, the pressure, our problems. Our problems," Lucas interrupted, his anger flaring. "What problems, Elena? I thought we were happy. I thought we were working through everything together." "I don't know," Elena sobbed. "I don't know why I did it. I was selfish, and I didn't think about how it would hurt you. I'm so sorry, Lucas. Please, you have to believe me." Lucas stood, his hands shaking with rage and sorrow. He couldn't bear to look at her. The woman he had shared his life with, who had promised him forever, had shattered every ounce of trust between them. "I don't know if I can believe you anymore," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "I don't even know who you are." Elena reached out to him, desperate, her tear-streaked face pleading for forgiveness. "Please, Lucas, we can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't leave me, please." Lucas stepped back, his eyes filled with pain. "I need time," he said, his voice hoarse. "I need time to think." With that, Lucas walked out of the room, leaving Elena behind, her sobs echoing through the apartment. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay, not right now. The weight of her betrayal was too much to bear. He wandered the streets of Vienna, the night air cold against his skin. The city, once his sanctuary, now felt foreign and empty. He passed by the cafes and parks they used to frequent together, each one a painful reminder of what they had lost. How had it come to this? How had he been so blind? As the hours passed, Lucas found himself sitting on a bench by the Danube River, staring out at the water. His mind raced with conflicting emotions: anger, sadness, confusion. He had loved Elena with every fiber of his being, but now he wasn't sure if that love was enough to repair the damage. Could he ever forgive her? Could he ever trust her again? The questions weighed heavily on him, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find the answers. Love, he realized, was not always enough to hold a relationship together. It required trust, honesty, and loyalty, things that had been broken beyond repair. But as the sun began to rise over the city, Lucas made a decision. He would confront Elena one last time, but this time he would be honest with himself about what he truly wanted. He couldn't change the past, but he could decide his future. A week later, Elena sat across from Lucas in a small cafe near their apartment, her eyes swollen from days of crying. Her hands trembled as she clutched a steaming cup of coffee, avoiding Lucas's gaze. The cafe was quiet, with only a few early morning patrons scattered around. The soft murmur of conversation filled the air, but the tension between them was palpable. Lucas sat across from her, his face impassive, but his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The week apart had given him time to reflect, to sift through the debris of their relationship. He hadn't come to any easy conclusions, but he knew one thing for certain: the trust between them was shattered, and no matter how much time passed, it wouldn't be easy to rebuild. Elena finally broke the silence. "I'm so sorry, Lucas," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft clatter of plates. "I've thought about what I did every single day. I wish I could take it all back. I wish I could undo everything." Lucas stared at her for a moment, his blue eyes cold, searching her face for some sign of the woman he had once known. She looked so fragile now, her once bright aura dulled by guilt and sorrow. But underneath it all, he still saw the Elena he had fallen in love with, the woman who used to dance barefoot in their living room, who loved art so passionately that she could make him see beauty. The woman who used to dance barefoot in their living room, who loved art so passionately that she could make him see beauty in even the simplest things. But that woman had betrayed him in the worst way. "I've had a lot of time to think," Lucas began, his voice steady but firm. "And I've been asking myself one question over and over. Why? Why did you do it, Elena? I need to understand. Was it something I did? Was it something missing in our relationship?" Elena wiped her eyes, her hands trembling as she set down the cup. "No, it wasn't you, Lucas. It was never you. I don't know how to explain it without sounding like I'm making excuses, but I was lost. We were going through a rough patch, and I started feeling like I wasn't enough, like I was losing myself in the marriage. When I met Damien during that work trip, it wasn't love or even lust. It was an escape, a distraction from everything I was feeling." 6 months, Elena, Lucas said bitterly, leaning forward. 6 months is more than a mistake. You don't make a mistake for half a year. "I know," she whispered. "I know that. And I hate myself for it every single day. Damien meant nothing to me, but I let him into my life because I was too afraid to face what was happening between us. I was selfish, and I betrayed you." Lucas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words press down on him. "I gave you everything," he said softly, his voice breaking. I trusted you. You were the person I thought I could rely on no matter what. And now, I don't know how to look at you without seeing those pictures in my mind. Elena flinched, her tears falling freely now. I know I can't take back what I did, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want to make things right, Lucas. I don't want to lose you. Lucas sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. I don't know if I can forgive you, Elena. And even if I could, I don't know if I can trust you again. Trust is the foundation of everything we had, and you destroyed it. Elena's face crumpled, and she sobbed quietly into her hands. I don't deserve your forgiveness, I know that, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, if you'll let me. Lucas remained silent, watching her crumble under the weight of her guilt. He wanted to feel compassion, to offer some kind of comfort, but the anger and hurt inside him were too overwhelming. He had spent years building a life with Elena, and now all of it felt like a lie. I loved you, Elena, Lucas said finally, his voice soft but filled with sadness. And maybe a part of me still does. But love isn't enough to fix this. I need time, and I need space. I can't just pretend like everything will go back to the way it was. Elena nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I understand. I'll give you as much time as you need. Just don't shut me out completely, please. Lucas stood up, reaching for his coat. He felt exhausted, emotionally drained, as if he had just fought a battle and lost. I don't know what the future holds, Elena, but right now, I need to figure things out on my own. Without another word, Lucas walked out of the cafe, leaving Elena behind. The cold morning air hit his face as he stepped onto the street, the weight of the conversation pressing heavily on his chest. He had made his decision. For now, at least, he couldn't stay in a relationship where trust had been so completely destroyed. As he walked through the quiet streets of Vienna, Lucas felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. He didn't know what his next steps would be, but he knew he had taken the first one. He had chosen himself. He had chosen to heal, even if that meant walking away from the woman he had once loved with all his heart. 6 months later, the city had shifted from winter's icy grip to the warmth of spring. Lucas sat on a park bench near the Danube River, the soft sound of the water flowing peacefully behind him. It had been 6 months since that fateful night when he had discovered Elena's betrayal. 6 months of soul-searching, of healing, of trying to find some sense of closure. He had spent the early weeks in a haze, grappling with the overwhelming emotions of anger, betrayal, and grief. He had rented a small apartment on the other side of the city, away from the memories that clung to their shared home. He kept his distance from Elena, answering only a few of her messages and calls, needing the space to breathe, to think. In those months, Lucas found himself gravitating towards his old passions, things he had set aside during the busyness of his marriage. He spent more time at art galleries, immersed in the quiet beauty of paintings and sculptures that had always brought him peace. He started hiking again, reconnecting with nature, and finding solace in the mountains that framed the outskirts of Vienna. But even in the midst of his healing, Elena's absence was a constant shadow. He couldn't deny that he still thought about her, wondered if she was okay. He knew she was seeing a therapist, trying to make sense of her own actions. But Lucas had made no promises about their future. He was still searching for answers within himself. One afternoon, while walking along the Danube, Lucas received a message from Elena. It was short and simple. "Can we meet?" He hesitated, unsure if he was ready to see her again. But something inside him, perhaps a lingering need for closure, urged him to agree. He replied with a time and place, and a few days later, they met once again in the same cafe where they had last spoken. Elena looked different now, older, perhaps more worn from the emotional toll of the past months. But there was also something softer about her, as if she had come to terms with her mistakes. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. "I didn't know if you'd agree to meet," Elena said softly, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. Lucas shrugged, his voice calm. I wasn't sure either. She looked down, gathering her thoughts before speaking again. I've been seeing a therapist. I've been trying to understand why I did what I did, why I hurt you the way I did. I know I can't undo the past, but I've been working on myself. Lucas nodded. I'm glad you're taking steps to heal, but I've also been doing my own healing, and I've come to realize that I need to focus on myself too. Elena's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she nodded in understanding. I know, I don't expect anything from you, Lucas. I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, truly sorry. For the first time in months, Lucas felt a sense of closure. He had been holding on to his anger for so long. But now, sitting across from Elena, he realized that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant letting go of the pain and choosing to move forward, whether that was together or apart. I forgive you, Elena, Lucas said quietly, his voice steady. But that doesn't mean we can go back to what we had. Too much has changed. Elena nodded, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I understand. I'll always be grateful for the time we had together. With that, they sat in silence. The weight of their shared history finally lifted. They would part ways, both of them forever changed by what had happened, but perhaps better for it.